Beauty and the Billionaire, The Wedding, by Jessica Clare. Narrated by Gillian Macy. "Goodness gracious, what is that?" Mei Li's southern drawl sang out to Gretchen as she entered the Buchanan real estate office downtown. With a foot holding the door open, Gretchen carefully hauled her tray inside, careful not to hold it too close and get red and white icing all over her black sweater. "Happy holidays to you, too." Mei Li giggled, trotting out from behind the desk and hurrying forward to get the door. "It's not every day the boss's fiancé shows up with a donut mountain. Y'all will have to forgive me if I'm a little startled." "It's called a Religieuse L'Ancienne. It's a 3-foot-tall centerpiece made from eclairs. It's supposed to look like a nun or a cone or something." "Well, you've definitely got the something part down. It looks more like Santa Claus." Mei Li hurried forward to give Gretchen a hand. Gretchen brightened. "That's exactly what I was going for. Santa Claus. Or a nun. At any rate, I saw it on a TV show and wanted to try making one." Or 3. Well, it was more like 4, since the first 2 fell apart, but she wouldn't share that with Mei Li. The other woman was giving her a sympathetic look. "Stress baking again?" "Is it obvious?" Gretchen set the tray on top of Mei Li's desk and smoothed her hands down her too tight-fitting pants. All the pre-wedding diets were a disaster, mostly because when Gretchen was anxious lately, she baked. Cookies, torts, pies, pralines, you name it. And lately, she was really stressed. "It's not obvious," Mei Li said in a sweet voice, "other than the fact that this is the 3rd time you've been here this week to drop off some cookies." She poked a red eclair with a pink fingernail. "This stuff edible? The cleaning crew will be wanting to know. They love it when you're stressed." "Should be, unless I totally fucked it up." She stared down at the eclair mountain. It was a French monstrosity meant to be a centerpiece to a bakery window or a Christmas display, but hers just looked... Well, it did look like a stack of eclairs. Or Santa Claus. "I'm going to tackle Yule logs next. Actually, I was thinking of making several different Yule logs, all in different flavors with different swirl patterns and different sizes, and stacking them together and adding some marzipan flames on top, or maybe some sugarwork flames. What do you think?" Mei Li clutched the sides of her tweed skirt. "I think I'm getting fatter just thinking about it." "Yeah, me too." Didn't mean she wouldn't be making it, of course. That was how she rolled lately. Over-caffeinated, over-sugared, and completely stressed out. "You should be relaxing, only a week before your wedding." "Oh, God, don't remind me. I might have a nervous puke all over the floor." Mei Li fell silent, looking troubled. "Weddings are supposed to be wonderful, Gretchen." Yeah, they were, but this one was starting to feel a little cursed. "How's yours going, by the way?" The sweet smile returned to Mei Li's round face. "Oh, I really don't know. Griffin's great aunt and his cousin Alex want to organize it all since he's an earl." She shrugged. "I mostly need to just show up and not look like a doofus." "Lucky bitch," Gretchen teased, and Mei Li giggled again. "Can we switch weddings? That sounds perfect to me." "Hands off. Griffin's mine." "Well, I didn't say I wanted your bridegroom, just the wedding planning." Gretchen wouldn't trade Hunter for all the earls in the world, especially not stuffy, incredibly proper Griffin, who was the polar opposite of his frizzy, countrified fiancé. "Speaking of, where's my one and only?" "Conference call," Mei Li said, pulling an eclair from the top of the Religieuse L'Ancienne and nibbling delicately on it. "She'll be done in a minute. And this is amazing. Bless your heart for baking this all up." Gretchen sighed and picked up a magazine from a nearby table. "I'll wait." Hunter was doing his best to clear his calendar so they could go on a honeymoon immediately after the wedding. But with the holidays nearly arrived, and the usual end-of-business items that had to be wrapped up, he was extremely busy. It made it hard when she was feeling needy and wanting to talk to him, but she was content to wait for a bit. He'd make time for her. He always did. She flipped through the magazine idly, then gazed down at the ring on her hand. A week from now, it would be paired up with a wedding band. The wedding that was both the pride and plague of her last year would finally happen. She'd be married to the man of her dreams. They just had to make it until then. Gretchen flicked past another page in the magazine, too distracted to pay much attention to it. It wasn't that there was a problem between her and Hunter. Hunter was perfection, and she counted herself as the luckiest woman on earth to have him. But for most of this year, it had felt like one problem after another leading up to the wedding. She'd had bridesmaids get knocked up by her groomsmen. She'd had groomsmen drop and others take their places. Heck, even her agent had bailed on the wedding. Kat was supposed to be a bridesmaid, but had moved to Europe a few months back to be the assistant to some big German author, so she'd had to replace her too. And then, Gretchen had had to move the date from spring to fall because of Hunter's work or Audrey's baby. After that, the date had been pushed yet again, and here she was, getting married on Christmas Eve, because at some point she'd decided that was a good idea. And she'd gone through so many bakers and caterers that she was pretty sure there weren't any left in New York State that she hadn't fired. Her wedding planner had taken off to Vegas for an entire month, and, on top of it all, Buchanan Manor had water damage in the ceiling, and an entire wing had been closed off. The workers had promised her and Hunter that they would be done in time for the wedding, which was going to be taking place at the manor, but she wasn't so sure. Heck, she wasn't sure of anything anymore, except that she desperately wanted to just be married and move on to the next chapter in their lives, to be able to relax and just enjoy being together. The door opened, and a small woman walked in. Gretchen looked up automatically, and the woman visibly recoiled at the sight of her. Well, okay, that was different. Did she have flour on her face? Gretchen surreptitiously licked her thumb and brushed it over the corners of her mouth just in case. The woman moved to the front desk, a large manila envelope clutched in her hand. She leaned over Maylee's desk, her hair nearly touching the poor, mangled religieuse. "I'm here to see Mr. Buchanan." "Did you have an appointment?" Maylee pulled out her planner. "I don't, but he's going to want to see me." She looked over at Gretchen again, then leaned further toward Maylee. Her voice dropped. "It's imperative." Okay, well, now Gretchen was curious. She pretended to flip another page, watching the woman out of the corner of her eye. The woman was pretty, with cute little nude heels that showed off her perfectly tanned calves, despite the fact that it was winter. She wore a black turtleneck over a short red skirt and had a Christmas tree pin over the breast of her sweater. It was a very cute, very together look that Gretchen would have never been able to pull off. Maylee gave the woman an uneasy look, her gaze flicking to Gretchen. "Mr. Buchanan just finished his call. I don't think—" Down the short hallway, the door to Hunter's office opened. He stepped out, adjusting his jacket, and Gretchen felt a little flutter at the sight of him. He was so handsome. God, just looking at him did all kinds of dirty things to her. Some people might not like the heavy scars across his face, but they revved her engine like nobody's business. Just thinking about him made her all hot and bothered, and she crossed her legs so she could squeeze her thighs tight. She'd worn sexy underwear today, since she'd planned on coming into the office. Maybe a lunchtime quickie was in the works. But his office was all windows, so maybe not. Damn it. His eyes lit up at the sight of her in the lobby, and then his gaze moved to the woman waiting at the counter with the envelope. His expression grew cold, distant. And that was odd. Gretchen felt a weird prickle of alarm. "Mr. Buchanan," the woman said, stepping forward, "I need a moment of your time." His jaw clenched in the way it did when he was pissed, and then he nodded. "Get in here." He pointed at his office, then glanced back at Gretchen. "Give me a moment." "Sure," she said, bewildered at his stiff tone and rude treatment of the woman. This wasn't like her Hunter. Her sweet, thoughtful, romantic Hunter was always gracious, always kind. But the look he was shooting the woman who smugly strolled into his office was full of disdain and even dislike. What was going on? The moment Hunter's office door closed, Gretchen got to her feet and put the magazine down. She tiptoed over to the door, ignoring Mei Li's small protest. She was going to be the boss's wife. She could do what she liked, and right now she wanted to know what was going on. So she put her ear to the door and snooped. Hunter couldn't hide his frustration at the woman standing in his office. "What are you doing here?" Miss Kendler stepped toward him, ignoring his bad mood, and held out the envelope. "I brought the pictures. I thought you might want to see them before things proceed." Her superior attitude irritated him. That, coupled with the fact that she'd showed up to his office even after he'd specifically told her not to, it made his mood rather foul. "I'm paying you good money, so I might as well see what I'm getting out of this." He held his hand out. She placed the envelope in his hand. "I think you'll see the pictures are as we agreed." He'd be the judge of that. Trying to surprise Gretchen for their wedding was trickier than he'd anticipated, mostly because, well, he planned big. He'd tried to think of the perfect gift to give her, and one concept had come to mind, a replica of Ina Garten's Barefoot Contessa kitchen. She loved cooking shows and loved baking for the recipe book she was working on, but it kept them apart during the daytime. So he wanted a new kitchen for her in Buchanan Manor, upstairs, next to his office, so he could be near her all day long, instead of a floor and half the manor apart, so he could walk next door and kiss his wife if he wanted to. And, because he liked spoiling her, he might have gone overboard and requested the same kitchen for the private island he'd purchased her as a second wedding gift. The money wasn't the problem. The contractors he was working with, they were a fucking pain in the ass. For one, they weren't on time with anything. For two, they were terrible at keeping things under wraps. He'd wanted it to be a surprise for Gretchen, but so far he'd had to make up an excuse about water damage to keep her out of that wing of the house, and now the interior designer was showing up here at his office? He'd have fired her fucking ass, except for the fact that they were a week away from completion. Theoretically. That was, providing the cruise she'd sworn would be done last month would, in fact, be done by Christmas. He didn't believe Ms. Kendler, but he didn't have a choice at this point. It was too late to hire anyone else. So, he pulled out the pictures and began to flip through them. He could watch the progress of the work on his house, but for the island, he was having to rely upon pictures. And, since the woman seemed to constantly have trouble with her email, she kept showing up to his office. He'd have thought she was fishing for attention if it weren't for the fact that he'd told her quite specifically that the specialized kitchens were for his fiancée, and the fact that he wasn't much to look at. But still, sometimes he wondered. "And the price?" "A bit higher than we thought, but it's going to be necessary if we're going to make things happen." He grunted. "Why am I not surprised?" contractors. This was the 4th time she'd raised the estimated price on him. Just get it taken care of, and never come to my office again. I don't want my fiancé to get suspicious. I don't want her to know about this. Ms. Kendler gave him a sweet smile. Of course not. Shall we move forward with the deal? Do I have a choice? Gretchen moved away from the door. She felt numb with shock. This wasn't something she'd have ever expected, but how could she possibly come to any other conclusion? A strange woman bringing photographs to her fiancé and demanding money? It was clear that her sweet, noble Hunter was being blackmailed. Someone was trying to ruin their happiness before they got to the altar. She walked slowly back into the lobby, sat down with her magazine again, and began to flip through it once more as if nothing was wrong. All the while, her brain was whirling. Clearly, it was something Hunter was ashamed of, or else he'd have told her about it. What could it be? Maybe someone from his deep past that had to do with the incident that scarred him? Rumors about his father? Financial problems? She didn't care. All she knew was that if someone was coming after her man, she'd make them pay. Hunter Buchanan was hers, and she loved him more than she loved life itself. If she had to play dirty to protect him from these assholes trying to blackmail him, she would. She needed a plan. But what? Maybe Audrey would have ideas. She resisted the urge to text her sister, though. Audrey was always busy, juggling her husband, her new baby, her job, her second pregnancy. That wasn't what made Gretchen pause, though. When it came to scheming, Audrey was less of a sneak and more of a Dudley Do-Right. For the first time in a long, long time, Gretchen wished that Daphne was around. Daphne was the sneaky, clever twin. Daphne was the one who didn't play by the rules. Daph would know what to do when it came to someone blackmailing Gretchen's man. But Daph was out of the picture. She'd just have to think of something on her own. Frustrated and unhappy, she went to Maylee's desk and plucked a red iced eclair off the religieuse and took a hearty bite out of it. If ever a woman needed to cheat on her diet, now was the time. You sure you're all right? Gretchen gave her fiancé a tired smile in the mirror as she squirted toothpaste onto her toothbrush. Just been a long day. He put down his floss and moved to her side of the palatial bathroom, leaning in to press a kiss onto her shoulder. They've all been long days lately. You're working too hard. Working too hard? All I did today was bake. She snorted and began to vigorously brush her teeth. That wasn't entirely accurate, though. She'd baked and she'd stewed. She'd Googled the fuck out of private investigators and contacted a law firm to see what options she had if her billionaire fiancé was maybe being blackmailed. Sadly, all the lawyers wanted to talk about was whether or not she wanted a prenup, which made her freak out just a wee bit more. Hunter kissed her shoulder again, his scarred fingers brushing over her bare skin. I know you, Gretchen. You have that look on your face that says you're stressed. You need to tell me what's bothering you. She leaned over to rinse and spit, making sure to push her ass against his cock as she did, because, hey, she was human, and her fiancé was super hot. I'm not stressed, she protested again. Okay, maybe I am, but it's just wedding stuff. It'll all be done soon. The look he gave her in the mirror was affectionate, even as his hand slid into the waist of the pajama pants she'd just put on not 5 minutes ago. You fired another caterer, didn't you? Maybe. I mean, if they don't know how to make a decent croquembouche, I can't exactly have them catering my holiday-themed wedding, can I? Also, did you notice that our colors aren't holiday? I've got to figure out how to meld the pinky purple of the bridesmaid dresses with the new decor and you're changing things at the last minute, Hunter chided, tugging the pajama pants down and exposing her panties. We've had this conversation. Let it go. He knelt and began to kiss the curve of her ass from behind, sending tingling shockwaves of lust through her body. Damn, and here she thought she'd be the one distracting him. Gretchen tossed her toothbrush down on the counter and shoved her pants down to help him out. They'd been together for over a year now, but the sex was just as intense and consuming as it was on day one. And when Hunter's mouth began to move lower down her hip, even as he turned her around so he could pay attention to her front, the breath left Gretchen's body entirely. She twined her fingers in his hair and moaned when he began to kiss toward the patch of curls shielding her sex. God, I love you. His chuckle skittered across her skin like a feather. You always say that when I'm about to go down on you. So she did. Like that was a problem. She meant it, though. And as he kissed his way between her parted legs, she vowed that nothing was going to come between them. Not crazy weddings, not blackmailing assholes, nothing. Come on, let's do another 30 burpees. Daphne groaned and remained flat on her yoga mat, staring up at the ceiling. This was hell, right? This had to be hell. Unfortunately for her, hell came around at 7 every morning to put her through an intense workout and then shadowed her for the rest of the day. We just did 50 crunches, she panted. Which is why we need to get your heart rate back up. Wesley, a.k.a. Satan, said. He patted her arm and then sprang to his feet as if made of air. Come on, 30 burpees and then we'll do some weight training. I don't have another 30 in me, she whined, even as she crawled to her feet and put her hands on her hips, glaring at her trainer. You do, Wesley said cheerfully. You're strong. Come on now. And he jumped into the air, indicating she should follow along. Fucking hell. This is what I get for showing up at the studio in sweatpants, she grumbled, but flung herself into the air. 30 burpees. She could do 30, hopefully. Fucking label. Thinks I'm too fucking fat, she panted, as she went through the motions of each burpee. Arms in the air and jump, then fling herself back down to the floor into a push-up, then fling herself back onto her feet again. It was torture. It didn't help that Wesley, gorgeous, studly, workout god Wesley, did them like he was born to it. He bounded through each one while she limped along, huffing and puffing like she was dying. But then the 30 was over, and she bent in half, groaning. He patted her sweaty back. You're doing great, Daph. Drink some water, and then we'll get on the free weights. She headed to her water bottle and towel, while Wes did a few more sets of burpees. Since he was her trainer and personal shadow, he took a bit more time in the gym every morning, and that was after being up and running for 2 hours, to keep his gorgeous physique in shape. She sipped her water and leaned against the wall of her private gym, trying not to stare as he put an arm behind his back and started to do one-armed push-ups. His tank top was open on the sides and loose, showing ripped abs and rock-hard muscles. Dear God, she was going to start drooling if he kept that up. She dabbed at her face and forced herself to look away, out the window, into the gray Manhattan morning. It was wrong to be crushing on her trainer and life coach. Seriously, a very bad idea. And even Daph, who excelled at poor decisions, knew it was bad. He was her nutritionist, bodyguard, trainer, and constant companion. When she'd gotten out of rehab 4 months ago, the label had paid through the nose to assign Wesley to her. This was what he did for a living. He shadowed troubled celebrities and helped them get their lives back on track, and then he moved on to the next. And so, even if he was the most mouth-watering of beefcakes, he was not for her. Which was for the best, she told herself, watching him work his way through another set of back-breaking reps that only showed how fit he was. Wesley was smart and funny and intensely disciplined. He was also completely different than anyone she'd ever met. He never drank anything stronger than green tea, never smoked, never lit up, never partied, nothing. She didn't even think he ate anything with sugar. In fact, she was pretty sure he didn't, because ever since he'd moved in, she didn't get sugar either, and he ate the same things she did. It was all egg whites and asparagus and so much fucking plain water she thought she'd float away. Every time she wanted something unhealthy, Wesley took it out of her hand. Cigarettes were a gateway drug back to the crack. Sodas were bad for you and led to sugar addiction. Cronuts? Absolutely fucking not. Coffee? Only black and decaf. And Wesley even went through the groceries her housekeeper brought back and threw out poor choices. He drove Daphne crazy. He drove her housekeeper crazy. The label? The label fucking loved him, of course, because his methods worked. And she'd been clean as a fucking whistle since he'd come into her life, which was good, she supposed. The problem was that being clean meant she couldn't hide from all her issues, and somewhere in the last few drug-filled years, she'd scared everyone out of her life. She told everyone she was fine with it, that fans filled the hole of loneliness, that she didn't mind that her old partying friends didn't call now that she was sober, and her family had given up on her a while back. That was okay. She had Wesley and her music, and most days that was enough. Except, once this Christmas album was in the can for next year, the label wanted to evaluate how she was doing. If she was doing great, Wesley would move on to another client. And she'd be all alone again. Her fingers twitched and she slumped against the wall. Just thinking about all that made her really, really want a cigarette. She licked her lips hard and stared out at the skyline again, as if it'd have answers. "Daff, come on, time for weights." He hopped to his feet and moved to the rack. "Let's start with 25s and see how we handle that, all right?" "Sure," she said listlessly, and followed after him. Wesley paused, frowning over at her. "What's wrong?" She marched in front of him, irritated. "What do you mean, what's wrong? I said I'd lift the fucking weights." He handed her a dumbbell. "Yes, but you didn't bitch about it. Something's wrong." She snatched it from his grasp. "Oh, fuck off, Wesley." "Bicep curl, alternate," he instructed, crossing his arms to watch her. "And tell me what's bothering you." Daphne curled one weight obediently, ignoring his second request. "Daphne," he warned as she continued to flex the weight silently. "This is part of our agreement." He pointed at her, and then himself. "We work out problems. We don't bottle them up, remember?" She gave him a snarl. "I'm just tired, okay? I'm tired of weights and working out and eating bib lettuce instead of Chinese takeout, and I'm tired of everyone being on my ass 24/7. She thrust the weights back at him. "I'm tired of fucking Christmas music and tired of Manhattan. I'm tired of all this shit, and I want to go back to California. I hate it here. I hate working out, and I really, really want a fucking cigarette." The moment the words left her mouth, she felt like an asshole. She'd lashed out at him when he was just trying to help her. Wesley just watched her, the expression on his face impassive. Shit. She took one of the weights back from his hands. "I know, I'm being a dick, and you can't wait to get rid of me." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to say it. I chase everyone away." He shook his head. You were an addict. That's different. Yeah, tell that to my family. The light laugh she tried to produce ended up being choked and ugly. It's a week until Christmas, and my sister's getting married, and do you think one of them has even called me? They don't even want a damn wedding gift from me. I'm such a mess. You were a mess, he corrected. You're on the road to recovery. Yeah, 6 months in rehab and another 6 clean. A whole fucking year. She twirled a finger and then began to do curls with the other weight. I know, they're just waiting for me to slip up again. But you won't. You're stronger than that. His utter confidence in her made her want to cry. Come on, Wesley. You know me better than that. I'm not strong. I whine and bitch, and the only reason I'm doing good is because you're here at my side constantly to slap my hand when I reach for bad things. That's not true. It's true, she exploded again. That's your job, remember? It's not me, Daphne. You're a lot stronger than you realize. He put his hand over hers, where she gripped the weight. And I'm not always going to be here. I know. That made her want to cry, too. The thought of Wesley leaving made her feel all kinds of hollow. Not because she needed him, but because she liked him. He was the one person in the world that hadn't given up on her. The one person in her life that looked at her like she wasn't a piece of shit. You need to believe that you're strong, he told her gently, his thumb caressing her bare, sweaty arm. You're Daphne Petty. You've sold 20 million albums and have had 5 #1 hits. You sell out concerts everywhere you go. People are dying for your next record. That means something. Did it? She'd done all that while coked out of her mind. It doesn't mean anything if the world hates you. I don't hate you. A sexual flush moved through her, and she became acutely aware of Wesley's hand on her arm. And the fact that she hadn't had sex in a year. You're paid to not hate me. That has nothing to do with it, Wesley said, his hard mouth turning up at the corner. And I bet your sisters don't hate you. You said you pushed them away, didn't you? So why not reach out to them again? Bring them holiday gifts. They don't want to see me. You don't know that, and you'll never know that unless you extend the olive branch. She considered it for a long moment, then looked up at him. What about your family? Do you need time off for Christmas? We can talk about that later. The look on his face became that one she'd learned to dread during their workouts. And since you're not in the mood to do arm curls, let's do more burpees. Daphne groaned aloud. Fucking torturer. Why on earth was she falling in love with this man? She must be crazy. Gretchen. I need a bridesmaid check-in. How are we all doing, and does anyone have a peanut allergy? Audrey. Oh boy, you're gonna lose your mind before we hit the big day, aren't you? Gretchen. Don't be ridiculous. Anyone else? Taylor. I have an allergy to olives. Gretchen. There won't be any olives in anything I'm baking, I promise. And it's normal for a girl to check in on her bridal party. We have the bachelorette party in 3 days, which I should probably bake something for. Greer. Wait. Why are you baking, Gretchen? What happened to the lovely baker we just signed on last week? You paid him an enormous fee. Gretchen. There was a croquembouche disaster. Bronte. Croquet what? Greer. Oh no, Gretchen. More firings? You can't cater the entire wedding yourself. Edie. Gretchen, honey, you're going to give yourself a nervous breakdown before the wedding. Gretchen. That's everyone except... Wait, Who are we missing? Someone's gone radio silent on me. Gretchen. Red alert! Red alert! Gretchen. Who are we missing? Gretchen. Oh my God, I swear I'm going to have a nervous breakdown if someone doesn't chime in soon. Chelsea. You guys are killing me. Really, really killing me. It's 7 a.m. Don't any of you sleep? My phone's going off like there's some sort of national disaster going on. Gretchen. Oh, thank God. There's Chelsea. Greer. Gretchen, what can I help you with? Taylor. Want me to come help you bake some stuff? Audrey. I can get a babysitter if you need me to come by, or I'll make Reese take Chloe for the day. He wants to take her to the park. Gretchen. Oh my God, Chloe is like 3 months old, Audrey. What's she going to do at the park? Audrey. Spit up on her daddy and get some fresh air? Edie. That's so adorable. I think my ovaries just exploded. Chelsea. You have ovaries? I thought you just had cats. Edie. I do have ovaries. They compel me to adopt more cats. Speaking of, you guys want one? There's the cutest little rescue we just picked up yesterday, and she's a bit too scared of the cafe. Edie. Hello? Bronte. Edie. All right, damn it, I can take a hint. Taylor. I think we should stage a bridesmaid intervention and swoop in and help Gretchen today. Edie. I can be there by noon if I clear my schedule. Audrey. Same. I'll let Reese know he has baby duty. Greer. My schedule is open, of course. I'll be there in an hour, Gretchen. Taylor. Me too. Bronte. I'll talk with Marjorie and let her know I won't be in until tomorrow, but I can make it over. Chelsea. Ah, crap. Okay, I'm getting out of bed. Well, in a minute. Sebastian's awake and happy to see me. Taylor. TMI! Gretchen. You guys can't see it, but I'm totally blubbering over here. I love all of you. Daphne hesitated at the door of the enormous Buchanan Manor. She had a poinsettia plant in hand as a housewarming gift, but that felt a little stupid considering her sister had been living here for over a year now. It wasn't the size of the place that was making her stomach tie up in knots. Hell, last year she'd performed for a prince's private birthday party. She'd seen buildings that would put this one to shame. It was that she wasn't invited, and she was pretty sure that she wasn't going to be welcomed. She glanced back at the taxi where Wesley was sitting in the back, watching her. He gave her a thumbs up, and the look on his face was confident. Very much the, "You've got this, Daph," sort of look that he always gave her. And for some reason, that made her feel better. Maybe she did have this. Maybe Gretchen wouldn't slam the door in her face. God, she wished Wesley was coming in with her. She wanted to wave him forward, but she knew he felt she should do this on her own. That was key to growing and adapting, he'd told her in the car on the way over. She needed to learn to be okay on her own. Today was a baby step that would be part of a larger process, and it was good for her to go visit family by herself. She didn't need him hovering, he'd proclaimed, and given her a proud look. Like she was someone to be proud of. Funny, she still felt like Daphne the mess. She wondered if that feeling ever went away. Probably not. She smoothed a hand over her reddish-blonde ponytail and straightened her sunglasses. Between the natural hair color and the fact that she'd gained 35 pounds since entering rehab, she didn't get recognized on the street a lot. People were too busy looking for thin and glamorous Daphne Petty, global superstar with aquamarine hair, a wild dress, and 2 pounds of makeup. No one looked twice at a frumpy redhead with no makeup. Well, most days. Sometimes the paps were tipped off, and then she'd have to endure another week of horrifying pictures of her in the tabloids, usually photoshopped to make her look like an utter train wreck. and then more conference calls and discussions with the label about her progress. If it wasn't Wesley up her ass, it was the label, thanks to Cade Archer's intervention. Ever since he'd bought enough shares to be on the board, it was no longer, "Here, have another hit of the good stuff before going on stage, Daphne." It was, "Did you do your yoga today, Daphne?" Or, "Here's a great recipe for quinoa with apples, Daphne." Which wasn't terrible. It was just different. In fact, most of the time she liked it. She liked knowing that people were pulling for her instead of waiting for her to screw up. That was a rather nice change. The taxi's horn honked, and she turned around and flipped at the bird. She knew Wesley was waiting for her to knock on the door instead of just standing there like an indecisive lump. But damn, give the girl a minute. It wasn't every day that she showed up on her sister's doorstep looking to make amends. Daphne sucked in a breath, steeling herself. She knocked. And waited. There was nothing for a long, long minute. Then, what sounded like a flurry of laughing female voices floated toward the door. A moment later, the door opened and a smiling Gretchen stood there, looking the same as she always did, slightly disheveled, a pair of nerd glasses perched on her nose, and dressed in yoga pants. Daphne felt a pang of envy. No matter what went on, Gretchen always seemed to be laughing. That laughter died at the sight of Daphne on the doorstep. Surprise? Daphne held out the plant. She couldn't even muster her on personality, the one she used to get through meet and greets. This was her sister. There was no pretending around her. Gretchen's wide-eyed gaze swept up and down Daphne. Holy shit! Oh, holy shit! Daphne shivered a little on the doorstep. It was snowy, and she hadn't exactly dressed to be standing on the porch for an hour. Is this a bad time? Oh my God, are you kidding? Gretchen reached forward and grabbed Daphne under her arm. A moment later, Daphne's face was squished into Gretchen's shoulder, and the poinsettia sandwiched between them. Daph, you look amazing! What are you doing here? Weirdly enough, hot tears started to flood her eyes. No recrimination? No chastising? She'd expected a lecture from her sister about all the bad choices she'd made in her life, but this was Gretchen. Gretchen forgave easily. It was her twin, Audrey, that would be the more difficult one to convince. Hey, sis, I thought I'd come by and wish you a Merry Christmas. I can't believe you're in New York. This is perfect. It is? Daphne hugged Gretchen back. Her mind was full of conflicting feelings. She was happy that Gretchen was clearly thrilled to see her, and a little guilty that she'd been in New York for a few weeks now and hadn't stopped by. Then again, she'd been told by Audrey, her fucking twin, that she needed to never contact them again. She'd listened, even though it hurt. Daphne knew she'd fucked up things badly. Of course, she didn't know why she was feeling guilty. Here they were, having a grand time, and no one had even bothered to send her a text message for the last freaking year. But when Gretchen squeezed Daphne tight again, it was okay. The past was past, and she knew she'd been a jerk. There was no place for hurt feelings. She'd learned that in therapy. She'd burned a lot of bridges. And if people weren't interested in being in her life anymore, she couldn't really blame them. Didn't mean it didn't hurt, of course. Come on in, Gretchen said excitedly, tugging Daphne forward. Hunter's not here or I'd introduce you. You haven't met my baby, have you? He's the best. She beamed at Daph. Daphne held the poinsettia awkwardly, not quite sure what to do with it. There were a bunch of women standing in the hallway, wearing aprons and giving her curious looks. One or two whispered behind their hands, and Daphne hoped that was just because they'd recognized her and not something worse. still made her uncomfortable. Is this a bad time? Oh, silly! When have you ever cared about that? Gretchen grinned at her sister, and then sobered when she realized Daphne wasn't laughing with her. Sorry, what I meant to say was no, it's not a bad time. We're doing some holiday baking. Because she keeps firing her caterers, a tiny woman with dark hair wearing a bright red cardigan pointed out. Which wouldn't be a problem except she has a wedding of 200 people in 4 days and no one to bake for her. It's Christmas, Greer, Gretchen retorted. If they can't make a fucking croquembouche for a fucking wedding, then they don't deserve to cater me. A girl in a Doctor Who scarf chimed in. I can't make a croquembouche either. You hush, Taylor. Gretchen linked her arm with Daphne's and hauled her sister forward. Come on, you can help with the caramel. The herd of women chatted and laughed as they headed back into the house, and Daphne eyed her surroundings with surprise. Her flighty older sister had done really well for herself. The house was enormous and tastefully decorated with a mix of new and old, and the kitchen they led her into, like something out of a storybook, right down to the heaps of batter-filled bowls. Daphne set the poinsettia down on the counter. So, what do you want me to do? I can sing Christmas carols and even do some dancing, but I'm warning you, cooking is not part of my repertoire. That's fine. You can just hand me shit. Gretchen went to the counter and picked up a bowl, barely glancing at it as she beat the batter. I can't believe you're here. So, tell me what you're working on. Gretchen's smile seemed genuine, and Daphne relaxed a little. The label wants me to work on a Christmas album. It's a bit late for it to come out this year, but they want to make sure I have enough time to recover and get set on track. She didn't point out that right now the label didn't trust her to headline an expensive tour and not fall to pieces midway. She didn't blame them. She didn't exactly have a great track record. So, yeah, she was stuck with a cheesy Christmas album as her next work. It meant that she wouldn't be able to release new content for at least a year after that, and for some reason, she was okay with that. Being on tour was a never-ending stream of parties and people, and she didn't want to deal with it. Not yet. When that happened, Wesley would be out of her life for good, because then she would be firmly on the road to recovery. Broken-hearted and lonely? Sure, but in recovery. Hey, Gretchen? An all-too-familiar voice called out from another room. I just looked up croquembouche on my phone, and Martha Stewart's recipe says you should make it as late as possible because... Audrey entered the kitchen, caught sight of Daphne, and froze. Oh. Daphne stared at her twin with a bit of yearning. Since she'd seen her last, Audrey had gotten softer, her face rounder. Some of it was from the baby she'd had a few months ago, but it was so strange to see her twin's face and realize that they looked like each other again, right down to the shade of hair and the firm line of her mouth. And that just made everything that much more painful. Growing up, they'd been impossibly close. She'd slept next to her sister. They'd shared clothes, read each other's diaries, and had no secrets. But somewhere along the way, they'd grown apart, and as Daphne's career took off, her relationship with her twin crumbled. Daphne got into drugs and alcohol and partying, and Audrey got more and more responsible. She worked 60 hours a week, volunteered on weekends, and pretty much disapproved of everything Daphne did. The last time Daphne had overdosed, she'd had the hospital call Audrey, and Audrey had fucking abandoned her. Even now, after months and months of therapy, rehab, and time to lick her wounds, it still hurt like crazy. She'd thought if anyone would have her back forever and ever, it would be her twin. Guess not. And part of her therapy was to forgive and to understand. To realize that she'd screwed over people along the way and hurt feelings, and forgive them if they no longer wanted anything to do with her. Most of the time she could do that. Most of the time she understood. But looking at the face so similar to her own and seeing Audrey's expression shudder, realizing that her twin still hated her, some things still hurt. A lot. Gretchen nervously beat the batter in her bowl, watching the twins stare each other down. She had no idea what to do or which side to take. On her left, there was Daphne, impulsive cokehead and general ne'er-do-well. Except she'd turned over a new leaf and looked happier and healthier than she had in years. And there was clearly devastation in her eyes. On Gretchen's right, there was Audrey, responsible, dependable, no-frills Audrey, who had picked up the pieces so many times when Daphne had fallen apart. Judging from the look on her face, she wasn't ready to give Daphne another shot. So, Gretchen had no idea what to do. Tell a joke? Force one twin to assemble croquembouche trees while the other dripped caramel? Fling her arms into the air and run away screaming? She nervously mixed batter, her mind whirling. The bridesmaids had gone silent, and the tension in the air was thick. "Anyone want to test these?" Gretchen called out, and then gave a high-pitched, nervous laugh that sounded screechy and awful, even to her own ears. "You okay, Gretch?" Edie arched an eyebrow at her. Meanwhile, the twins kept staring, oblivious. Yeah, it was definitely time to do something. She stepped forward and pushed her bowl into Edie's arms. "Go croquembouche away. I need to talk to my sisters for a few." Before Edie could protest, Gretchen turned, grabbed each twin by the arm, and hauled them out of the kitchen. "Hold down the fort, Greer." "Me?" Greer protested. "I don't know how to cook." "Yeah, but you're the wedding planner," Chelsea said. "Plan us, baby." Laughter broke out behind them. Her friends would be fine. It was her family that was going to fuck shit up if they didn't get whatever this was out of their systems. Both women were silent as she led them down the hall. Luckily, one of Buchanan Manor's many studies was located near the kitchen, and Gretchen steered her sisters in there and shut the door behind them. "Okay, so I feel like we should talk, guys." Audrey crossed her arms and gave Gretchen an icy look. She deliberately avoided looking over at Daphne. "I don't know that there's anything left to say." Awkward. "Maybe," Gretchen began. "I've got something to say," Daphne interrupted. Oh boy. Gretchen braced herself for the worst, and as she watched, Audrey visibly stiffened. Daphne looked at Gretchen, and then Audrey. Her face softened, and her eyes shone with tears. "I think you look great, Aud. So happy." She smiled at Gretchen. "You too. I'm so happy for both of you." Gretchen could feel her eyes watering, and she sniffed hard. "Don't," Audrey said, raising a hand. "Just don't do this, okay?" The hurt look returned to Daphne's face. "Do what?" Audrey closed her eyes, her face hard. "Don't try and be all sweet to get back into our good graces." "She shouldn't?" Gretchen asked, giving her sisters a worried look. "No," Audrey said flatly. "She shouldn't. She had her chance 12 times, and each time she swore she would change, and each time, the moment she didn't get her way, she went right back to her old ways. And I'm done with it. I'm done with crying over you, worrying over you. I'm done with hurting over you. I have a family, Daphne. I'm happy, and I don't see room for you in it." Daphne flinched. Maybe she's turned over a new leaf, Gretchen suggested, her heart hurting for Daphne. I mean, you look good, Daph, very healthy and she's looked that way before and slid, Audrey retorted. I have to question the timing. Daphne's brows drew together, and she crossed her arms, and for a moment she looked stunningly like Audrey. Wait, what timing? Christmas? Can I help it if I fucking wanted to see my family for the holiday? Not Christmas, the wedding! Audrey jabbed a finger in Gretchen's direction. Are you trying to fuck this up for her? What? No! Daphne gave Gretchen an aghast look. Why would I do that? I just want you guys to be happy. I don't believe you, Audrey said, and this time her voice wobbled. That's the problem, Daphne. I never believe what you say anymore. I can't trust you. And it doesn't matter how many times you come back smiling and ready to make amends, because we've been hurt too many damn times with you. She gestured frantically at Gretchen and herself. If you were in our positions, would you trust? No, Daphne said, and her voice was small and aching. I guess not. Oh, God, she had to say something. Daphne looked as if she were ready to cry. Audrey looked as if she were ready to cry, too. What could she say to break them out of this funk? Hey, she croaked out. Look at the bright side. There might not be a wedding to break up in a few days. Then, because that sounded so dire, Gretchen burst into tears. Oh, my goodness, Audrey said, hurrying forward. The motherly tone was in her voice, ironic, considering that Gretchen was older. What are you talking about? Come, sit down, Daphne soothed. Her hand went to Gretchen's arm, and she gently steered her toward one of the chaises peppering the study. You've just got bridal nerves. Everyone gets that. It's nerves, Gretchen agreed, wiping her face with her hand. And she thought back to the woman in Hunter's office the other day. I think someone's trying to blackmail him into not marrying me. What? How could someone possibly not want him to marry you? Right? Gretchen wailed. I'm fucking fabulous. Daphne rubbed Gretchen's back. What do you mean, blackmail? So Gretchen cried and blew her nose in the tissue Audrey handed her and told the story about how the woman had sauntered into Hunter's office with pictures of some kind, and their conversation had been suspicious, and it was clear that whatever it was, the blackmailer was putting a high price tag on things that Hunter didn't want to pay. It's awful, Gretchen declared. I can't believe someone's blackmailing my sweet Hunter. The twins were silent. Gretchen blew her nose again. When they remained silent, she got suspicious. What? Is it possible, Daphne began delicately, that he's cheating on you? Audrey's voice was no nonsense. And that's what the blackmail is about? What? Gretchen gasped and lurched to her feet. She pushed off their well-meaning arms. No, absolutely not. Hunter would never look at another woman. He loves me. She shook her head. You guys are insane. That man worships the ground I walk on. After all, she'd punched Hunter's V card for him. She'd helped him start to get out of Buchanan Manor every now and then instead of hiding away from the world. He'd bred roses for her. He'd refused to get a prenuptial agreement repeatedly, even though Gretchen had suggested it. He loved her, more than anything. She knew him, and she knew that wasn't it. She shook her head. It has to be blackmail of some other kind. She turned to Daphne, a beseeching look on her face. You're the expert. What should I do? Me? Daphne put her hands on her chest. How am I the expert on blackmail? Audrey snort-giggled. Daphne shot her an irritated look. Gretchen waved all that aside. Not on blackmail, on being sneaky, on men. This one here's terrible at dating. She gestured at Audrey. Married the first guy that looked in her direction. Hey, Audrey protested. Why are we bagging on me suddenly? And I'll have you both know that Reese is amazing. He's got the baby today and hasn't complained a bit. How is the baby? Daphne's expression was wistful. Do you have pictures? Audrey hesitated. Then she pulled out her phone and began to scroll through. I'm not very good at taking photos, but here's one of... Hey, can we focus on me here? Gretchen snapped. The woman in crisis? Hello? Sorry, Daphne said. But she didn't put the phone down, as Audrey reached over and flipped through photos. What do you want me to do, Gretchen? I'm happy to help, whatever it is. Do you need me to hire you a private investigator? Gretchen shook her head. I get married in a matter of days. She wrung her hands, shredding the tissue she was holding. I want to help him, and he won't talk to me. You want my advice? Audrey asked. Maybe it's not blackmail at all. Maybe you're just misunderstanding. Sure sounded like blackmail, Gretchen said dubiously. She thought of the woman's smug look as she walked in, the look of horror on Hunter's face as he glanced over at Gretchen. He looked like a man caught. But he loved her. She knew that and didn't doubt it in the slightest. It had to be something, but what? I just want him to talk to me about it. Whatever it is, we can work it out together. Seduction, Daphne said, flipping through the pictures on the phone. A high-pitched squeal escaped her a moment later. Oh my God, look at her face. She's so cute, Aud. She touched her cheek, a teary expression on her face. She looks just like you, and me. Oh crap, this is too much. Audrey's firm mouth twitched a little, tension easing. I think she looks like Reese. What do you mean seduction? Gretchen asked, snapping her fingers. Can we focus? Sorry, both twins said at once, and then exchanged a startled look. Daphne cleared her throat a moment later. I mean, seduce it out of him. Wild, dirty sex. If it's something that's bothering him, he'll feel guilty. And most men aren't able to keep a secret when a woman's going down on him. Audrey hummed. She does have a point. Gretchen rubbed her hands. Okay, so attack Hunter the moment I see him. Like that'll be hard? I do that anyhow. Yes, but kick things up a notch, Daphne advised. Turn it up to 11, and then withhold from him. Gretchen looked at her, aghast. Withhold? You want to wring it out of him, don't you? Gretchen sighed. I just want to get married to the man I love. Then leave it alone, Daphne said bluntly, handing the phone back to Audrey. Ask yourself if it really matters. If you're happy, then just be happy. Let things lie. Easier said than done. Gretchen was many things, but patient wasn't one of them. I guess. Maybe she'd just seduce him after all and try to wring the information out of him. That sounded like the most fun. I suppose we should go back to baking. She rubbed her stomach. Getting a little hungry here. How about you guys? Audrey got to her feet. I have a feeling you're going to be cramming a lot of sweets in my direction for the next week. It's a good thing my gown isn't fitted like Taylor's. Nothing for me, thanks, Daphne added. I'm counting my macros. Your what? Counting my macronutrients. Wesley has me logging everything I eat and drink so I can be aware of what my caloric expenditure is. The label doesn't want me blimping up on my time off. Her smile was rueful. Not that I haven't done a good job of that anyhow. You look great, Audrey grumbled. Because I look like you, Daphne teased her sister. And Gretchen suddenly felt all weepy again, because it was almost like they didn't hate each other anymore. Man, she was such a sap lately. So much crying. "Who's Wesley?" she asked, trying to change the subject before she started blubbering like a madwoman. To her surprise, Daphne's face flushed. "He's my trainer and life coach." "But you're blushing," Gretchen pointed out. "Are you guys sleeping together?" "What? No." Her face grew redder. "I'm just a job to him." "But you don't want to be?" Audrey guessed as they left the study. Daphne just sighed. His lovely, talkative Gretchen was unusually quiet that evening through dinner. She curled up with a book while he went through some last-minute emails during their favorite TV show, and then, when they went to bed, still quiet. It worried him. Hunter tucked her against him and wrapped his arms around her. He kissed her neck. "Is everything all right?" Her smile was absent. "Just thinking." That was a red flag if he'd ever heard one. "Having second thoughts about getting married?" She jerked away from him in shock. "What? No! Why does everyone keep asking that?" Unease gnawed at him. "Who keeps asking that?" Gretchen shook her head and put her hands over his. "Just thinking about an annoying conversation I had earlier." She sighed and then got quiet. He waited, but she remained silent. Hunter racked his brain, trying to think of what could be bothering her. Did she find out about the island he bought her and disapproved? It seemed unlikely. She never told him how to spend his money, and the times he'd bought her something ridiculous, she'd been pleased. He pressed a kiss to her cheek. "And did you find new caterers?" "No," she said with a small sigh. "I'm just going to be doing a lot of baking between now and then. I'm never happy with what they make, so I might as well do it myself." He frowned. "Gretchen, it's a wedding for 200 people. She yawned. "Yeah, but it's Christmas baking. They're just going to get a lot of sweets and like it. Besides, my sisters said they'd help." That was typical of Audrey. "Wait, sisters? Plural?" "Mm-hmm. Daphne showed up today, brought me a flower." He sat upright in the bed. Why was she here? A fierce surge of possessiveness moved over him. Daphne had hurt Gretchen in the past. She was irresponsible and self-destructive, and the fact that she'd shown up in their lives mere days before the wedding, it sent alarm bells through him. Was this why Gretchen had been so worried and distant lately? More importantly, how could he fix this? She wanted to say hi, make amends. She was in town, you know. Gretchen yawned and snuggled back against him. She looked good. Actually, it's funny. She looked a lot like Audrey again. She hasn't since we were teenagers. Is she on drugs again? If so, he didn't want her and her messy ways anywhere near the wedding. Gretchen was stressed out enough already. I don't think so. It's hard to say. She's working with a personal trainer, I think. She turned in his arms and pushed her face against his neck, snuggling closer. Or a life coach, something strict. We were baking and she refused to touch any of it. Wouldn't even lick her fingers. Said her trainer wouldn't like it. That doesn't sound like the sister you told me about, Hunter said, sliding his fingers through her tangled hair. Any excuse to touch her. Any at all. I know, right? It's like she's the old Daphne, the normal one, before all the drugs. Her nose pressed against his throat. And now I feel bad that I didn't invite her to my wedding, and meanwhile her twin is my maid of honor. Ah, he suspected this was a large portion of what had been bothering her. Relieved that she'd confessed, he kissed the top of her head. Being able to hold Gretchen, to caress her and love her and know that he was loved in return. Every day still felt like a gift, and there was a small part of him that lived in fear that one day she'd wake up and change her mind. You have a soft heart. Maybe too soft. She sighed against his skin. I'm a wimp. Audrey is the strong one. It's just... Daph's my little sister. My family. I feel like she should be invited. I mean, it's Christmas and my wedding to boot. I feel terrible she's not included. So, include her. Gretchen chuckled. Audrey might kill me. It's not Audrey's wedding. We'll see. I probably shouldn't jump the gun anyhow in case Daph is still a train wreck, but just better at hiding it. Whatever you decide, I'll support it. His hand smoothed down the line of her back. She fit against him perfectly like this, all soft curves. He knew she'd been trying to lose weight for the wedding, but he couldn't tell the difference, and suspected the diet had gone the direction that all the caterers had, out the window the moment it disagreed with Gretchen's vision. He was glad, too. He loved her just the way she was, and he liked that she was soft in his arms. Nothing else mattered. He thought again of the upcoming wedding and the surprise honeymoon he was going to take her on their new private island. So, have you thought about what you want for Christmas? A wedding ring? She yawned. Are we seriously doing Christmas? We're getting married on Christmas Eve. Unless you want me to shave a snowflake somewhere special, I don't exactly have time to shop. Just throwing it out there. She patted his shoulder. Let's just do something small, all right? Small. Well, the island was small as far as islands went. We can do small. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, then slid his hands down to her ass and cupped it. Are you trying to seduce me, Hunter? She leaned back a little and arched an eyebrow at him. He kissed that sardonic eyebrow. Is that such a bad thing? Well, I was thinking maybe we could wait until we got married. Hunter stilled. What? Wait? Gretchen giggled and pushed him onto his back. I'm just fucking with you, babe. She loomed over him and began to kiss down his bare chest. Just wanted to see that look on your face. Very funny. She sobered and gave him a serious look. Is there anything you want to tell me, Hunter? Tell you? Tell her how much he desperately loved her and that he was the luckiest man alive? How she was utter perfection in human form and he adored every moment with her? But he told her that every day. There's nothing about me that you don't already know, Gretchen. The smile that ghosted her mouth was soft and sweet. Then she gave him a wicked wiggle of her brows and bent low to kiss his navel. And lower. Gretchen. Hey guys, question for my bridemaid posse. Gretchen. Guys, hello? Chelsea. Dear God, do you ever text at a normal hour? Gretchen. What? It's 7:30 on a Friday morning. You know what today is? Bachelorette party, bitches. Greer. Everything is scheduled, if that's what you're asking. We have tables reserved at Hungarama. Taylor. Oh, my. Gretchen. And I wanted to know if anyone objects to me asking Daphne to come with us. That includes you, Audrey. Edie. Wait, Daphne Petty, like your sister, the famous rock star? Why would we possibly object? Taylor. OMG, I'm a big fan. Bring her. Chelsea. Yeah, I'm totally cool with it. Bronte. You know I am, of course. It's your wedding. Smiley face. Greer. I can call and add one more to the reservations. Not a problem. Gretchen. Audrey? Audrey. What do you want me to say, Gretch? You know how I feel about her. I love her and hate her both. I wish I could trust her, but I don't. But it's your wedding, like Braun said, and if you want her there, then she should be there. Gretchen. You guys won't hate me? Audrey. Never. Don't be silly. Greer. Should I add one to the reservation? Gretchen. Let's do it. I'll call her. Daphne pressed her fingers to her mouth, smiling. Phone down, Wesley called from the other side of the private gym. Water break's over. Let's get back to squats. He lifted his chin at her, grinning. And don't pretend that that's business either. I know you, Daph. It's not business, she protested, as she put her phone back in her cubby and then slung her sweat towel over her shoulder. My sister texted me. She wants me to come to her bachelorette party tonight and hang out. She felt light on her feet with excitement and even skipped her way across the gym back to Wesley. I'm so excited. The teasing smile disappeared from Wesley's face. He shook his head. I'm sorry, Daph. I don't think you should go. It was like a punch in the gut. All the excitement and pleasure she felt at such a simple thing, an invite to hang out with her sisters, evaporated. She felt deflated. But my schedule's open. We're not recording today. Everyone's gone home for the holidays. I don't have anything to do except stay at home. He picked up a jump rope. I know. I'm not trying to be a hard-ass, Daph. I just don't think it's a good idea. You could stay in and work on your journaling. Work on her journaling? Was he crazy? She stared at him. He wasn't even offering to keep her company. Work on her fucking journaling? It's a bachelorette party, not an orgy. I'm just going to go and have a good time reconnecting with my sisters. Wesley said nothing, just held the jump rope out to her. She snatched it from him and walked away a few paces. He watched her to a count of 50. When she paused, he spoke. Will there be alcohol? Daphne shrugged. I won't drink any. I haven't had any booze or drugs since I left rehab. You know that. You're up my ass all damn day. It's not that I think you're weak and going to backslide, Daph. It's that it's a tough situation. You're a recovering addict. The last thing you need is to put yourself in a situation where you're setting yourself up for failure. Okay, he'd officially pissed her off at this point. She'd gone from hurt and confused to angry. You're being unfair. Weren't you the one who said I needed to reconnect with family? Now you're saying I shouldn't? Which one is it? Wesley shook his head and walked to the dumbbell stand. You're mad at me and you're not listening to what I'm saying. Oh, I'm hearing every single shitty word, Daphne snapped. I hear everything you say, and I seem to remember you saying something about how I needed to grow. So how about you let me fucking grow a little? You're mad, he said, as he turned and handed her the weights. The look on his face showed he was clearly surprised at her reaction. Daphne, it's my job to coach you. Don't you worry. I never forget that I'm just your job, she said bitterly, snatching the dumbbells from him. He was silent for a moment, then sighed as she began to do angry arm curls. All right, Daph. If you feel you're strong enough to handle going to this party tonight, then go. Haven't I been perfect for the last year? Haven't I eaten every single carrot stick you've tossed in my direction and avoided ice cream because you said it was a gateway drug? Haven't I worked out with you every stupid day? Her arms pumped faster and faster, fueled by her anger. Can't I go out and spend one evening hanging with my sisters? Gretchen's getting married. I'm never going to have this moment again. He blinked slowly, his hard face impassive. Then he nodded. All right, then. You want to grow? Go to the party tonight. Thank you, she snapped back at him. I will. Fine. Fine. But you're going to work out first, he cautioned, and then picked up a heavier set of weights. 15 more curls with those, and then we're going to do a second set with these. And for some reason, his bland acceptance irritated Daphne almost as much as his initial denial. Daphne's personal sedan pulled up to Hunk-O-Rama a few minutes after 7. Even from inside the car, she could feel the thumping bass coming from inside the club like a heartbeat. The bouncer at the door wore a Santa hat and a tight red bodysuit that didn't leave much to the imagination. Outside, women were laughing and chatting, and Daphne gave her wig one last pat. You think the sunglasses are too much? The sunglasses scream celebrity in hiding, Wesley said from his spot next to her in the car. Then again, you are a celebrity, so it's not inappropriate. Daphne grimaced, pulling them off her face. Yeah, I just didn't want tabloids catching me going into a strip club, you know? I doubt anyone's following us, Wesley said in a bland voice. The streets were pretty clear when we left, and I haven't noticed anyone tailing us. Want me to go walk the perimeter before you go in? Nah, I'm pretty sure you're right. Besides, it's close to Christmas. There's lots of other celebrities doing exciting things right now, I imagine. She hesitated, then gave Wesley a smile. All right, I guess I'm going in. I would say have fun, but I think we both know that's a bad idea. A hint of a grin tugged at his solemn face. She patted his arm. I'm stronger than you think. His fingers brushed over hers in a brief, startling caress. I know you are, Daphne. It's not your strength I'm questioning. That small touch left her flustered. Have fun, he said a moment later, and then got out of the car so he could jog around and open her door for her. She clutched her coat tightly to her body and emerged into the cold streets. She gave Wesley a quick smile and put a hand to her smooth brown pageboy wig. It was hideous, which meant it was perfect for not wanting to be recognized. She hoped. Those hopes were dashed when she moved to the front door. ID, please? He held out a gloved hand. Well, shit. She pulled out her ID and handed it to him, glancing impatiently into the club. Maybe he wouldn't notice her name. Oh my God, he declared, taking a dramatic, staggering step backward. Then he peered at her face. Stripper Santa grinned broadly. Daphne Petty, I love you. I danced to 2 of your songs, you know. She put a finger to her lips, looking around to see if anyone had noticed. He grimaced. Shit, sorry. Are you undercover? I'm meeting my sister for a bachelorette party. Shit, right. Of course. He pulled out his phone. Can I get a selfie with you, please? This is the best thing that's ever happened to me. Of course. Because who wouldn't be flattered at that? She posed and vamped for the camera with him, automatically going to her on personality. She chatted and flirted with him while he asked her a dozen questions and signed his sleeve. Someone else noticed what they were doing, and then suddenly she was signing autographs and posing in pictures with several people, all while wearing the hideous wig. Figured. By the time she actually got to touch the door, it had been 20 minutes, and she was sure she was going to be all over the internet in the morning. Nothing she could do about it, though. Daphne glanced back at the street before she went in, but the sedan was gone. Wesley was going to go off and do... well, she wasn't sure. When he wasn't shadowing her, he was sleeping or working out. So, can I buy you a drink when you get inside? Stripper Santa asked as he held the door open for her. The music was so loud the bass made her skin vibrate, and he had to yell to be heard. Actually, can I buy all of them for you? She winked at him and wagged a finger. Not drinking tonight, but thank you. He looked disappointed, but nodded. The interior of the club was small, but crowded. A long Y-shaped stage took up the center of the room, and there were booths in the back, along with a long bar. But she figured Gretchen and her group wouldn't be there. For a bachelorette party? They'd want to be where the action was. She delicately pushed her way through the crowd of women, while a man on stage gyrated and ran his hands over gleaming muscles. Daphne glanced up at him, but he wasn't built nearly as well as Wesley was. Her taste in men had gotten a lot pickier after working out with someone as built as Wesley. Plus, he was supportive and had an amazing sense of humor that spoke to her. So yeah, lots pickier. Still, she'd brought some dollar bills with her, and she was going to make sure it rained tonight. Her sister was going to have fun for her bachelorette party. She needed it. When Daphne had seen her last, Gretchen was incredibly stressed out. A blur of bridal veil caught her attention as the music changed to a disco number. The guy on stage turned and bent, and there was Gretchen, wearing a veil and shoving money into the dancer's thong. A few other familiar faces were sandwiched near her, along with Daphne's cringing twin, Audrey. "There's my sister," Gretchen bellowed as Daphne approached. She flung her arms out for Daph, ignoring the stripper, who gyrated away to another group of calling women. "Come here, you." Daphne chuckled as Gretchen enveloped her into an over-enthusiastic hug. "Already drunk, are we?" "Just having fun," Gretchen yelled in her ear. "Come sit by me." They sat down, and Daphne squeezed in next to Gretchen. She slid off her jacket and glanced around. The tiny table was covered with drinks already, the women packed so close together that their thighs touched. Audrey was on the other side of Gretchen, a glass of water in front of her. "Pregnant again," Gretchen bellowed as an explanation, then picked up her own fruity drink and chugged it. Across from her, Taylor, Chelsea, Bronte, and Edie were slinging back their own drinks, while Greer, heavily pregnant, typed into her phone. Gretchen plucked an umbrella from her drink and put it behind Daphne's ear. "You need to join the party, sis." "No, I'm good." Daphne put her hands up, shaking her head. One of the things they'd talked about at rehab was avoiding all temptation. And while she'd been a hell of a lot more addicted to drugs than to booze, it was a slippery slope. She could just as easily get hooked to a new thing. That was how her personality worked. She went to extremes and she didn't know when to stop. That was why Wesley was so hard on her. So she remained vigilant. Tonight, however, didn't seem to be about anything but partying. The girls laughed and drank, finishing one round and ordering another. Daphne requested a water with lime, and then the waiter spent several minutes trying to guilt her into doing shots with the others. Taylor spilled her drink all over the table, getting money and napkins sticky, and as a cherry slid toward Daphne, she was hit with the strong temptation to pick it up and just pop it in her mouth. And she hated that it seemed so easy to do. Then the shots arrived, and everyone clinked glasses except Daphne and the pregnant girls. The waiter winked and slipped a shot in Daphne's direction, which filled her with even more despair. Why did everyone want her to drink? Couldn't she have fun at a party without drinking? She found it hard to concentrate on the conversations, because between the strippers, the thumping music, some of which she was pretty sure was her own music, and the fact that the drinks were flying hard and fast, it was hard to concentrate. She found herself watching Gretchen raise her drink to her lips. She found herself watching every time Edie took a shot and grimaced at the taste. Her mouth watered when Taylor got another drink with those damn cherries. She wanted a drink. Her fingers itched for just one sip. Her mouth felt like sawdust, and she craved one of those alcoholic treats with an intense yearning that surprised her. Just one drink wouldn't hurt, right? Except when she reached for the shot that was sitting in front of her, she thought of Wesley and his fucking infernal carrot sticks and green tea. Wesley would be so disappointed in her if she broke, if she relapsed. A cold sweat broke out over her body. Gretchen laughed and shouted something in Daphne's ear as the music changed, but the room got too claustrophobic for her. She shook her head and got to her feet, pushing away from the table. "I'm sorry, I can't. I have to leave." "You okay?" Audrey shouted at her over the music. Like she could say anything to Audrey. Audrey was always perfect. She always made the right decisions. Daphne nodded and shoved her way out. "Can't stay," she called back, but it was probably drowned out over peals of laughter and catcalls as another dancer headed their way. Daphne burst out of the club a few moments later, and the chill of the New York City streets in December hit her like a wall. She rubbed her arms, realizing her coat was still inside. Didn't matter. She'd buy a new one. She couldn't go back in there, not with all those drinks and everyone having fun, and Daphne realizing she could never, ever do that again, not if she wanted to stay sober. The thought was so depressing, she burst into tears. She pressed a hand to her forehead and wandered away a few feet, trying to get away from the surging, thumping music. People walked past her, ignoring her. Even the bouncer that had been so thrilled to meet her earlier was busy stamping hands and flirting. She was alone. And she really, really wanted a drink, a cigarette, and a hit of some good nose candy. All together. Fuck. She sobbed again, and then swiped at her runny nose. God, she was such a mess. What was she going to do when Wesley left her? How long would she be strong without him? The thought made her even more melancholy, and she continued weeping as she wrapped her arms tight around herself and walked toward the nearest subway station. But when she turned the corner, Wesley was there. He was wearing a thick jacket, his running shoes, and a knowing look on his face. He pushed off of the wall he'd been leaning against and moved toward her, shrugging off his jacket and wrapping it around her. "You were spying on me?" Daphne wept, swiping at her face. He shook his head. "I just knew how it'd go. Thought I'd wait for you." That made her feel worse. He'd known she was going to break. "Damn it!" She shivered into his jacket. "I hate that you were right." "I hate that I was too." He put a comforting arm around her shoulders. "Come on. Why don't we get a bite to eat?" Oh, God, that sounded too good to be true. She burrowed under his arm. "Pancakes?" "No, but there's a great little vegan place around the corner that stays open late and has some wonderful healthy choices." Typical Wesley. She didn't even groan. She wasn't surprised. And actually, it felt nice to know that no matter how much she crumbled, he was ironclad and unchanging. Wesley didn't let her break. By the time they were seated in the quiet little restaurant, Daphne's tears had mostly turned to sniffles, and she had a cup of hot green tea in her hands. She was feeling more normal, too. She didn't even protest when Wesley ordered tofu lettuce wraps and 2 cups of spiced lentil soup for both of them. It wasn't pancakes, but that was okay, too. Wesley didn't drink his own tea. He just studied Daphne with a look that was so understanding that it made her ache. "Do you want to talk about it?" She shook her head, but began to talk anyhow. They were all drinking," she said, and rubbed her face with one hand. "And at first it didn't bother me, but then they just kept drinking, and they were having so much fun, and it was like an itch under the skin. I kept watching them because I couldn't drink, and the more that I wanted it, the easier it felt like it would be to break." "But you didn't?" "I didn't," she agreed, and was stupidly pleased when that small, rare smile returned to Wesley's hard mouth. I really, really fucking wanted to, and I knew if I stayed, I'd have just one drink, and that one drink would turn into 2, and then 10, and then they'd be picking my plastered ass up off the floor at closing time, and a month from now I'd be back in rehab. She sighed and picked up her teacup and took a sip. Unsweetened, but the bitterness was kind of soothing. I hate that I'm so weak. It's not that you're weak, Wesley corrected. He reached over and brushed his hand over hers. It's that you put yourself in a situation where it'd be impossible to remain strong. You were smart enough to realize it and got out of there. It's not about being weak. It's about avoiding the situations that make you feel as if you'll fail. Was that why he was such a disciplined hard-ass? She kept still, because his hand was still on hers on the table, and she didn't want to ruin that. It was rare for Wesley to touch her, and she hadn't realized until now how much she'd been craving it. So she held her tea with her other hand and gave him a sad little smile. When does it get easier? Never. It never gets easier. Again, his hand brushed over hers. But you get stronger. That sounded depressing. At least I got to see my sisters. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. They're probably upset I left early. They'll understand when you tell them why, he said, and pulled back. He picked up his own tea and then glanced out the window at the snowy streets. She looked outside, following his gaze. A restaurant across the way was covered with holiday decor, a menorah in one window and a Christmas tree in the other. I'm sorry you had to spend your evening waiting for me. Not that she was in the club long, less than a half hour, she wagered. He shrugged his big shoulders and gave the waitress a nod as she set the cups of soup down in front of them. You're my job, Daphne. Of course I'm going to be here for you. That's what I do. Great. She just loved being reminded that she was his job. Still, it's the holidays. Maybe you should go home and visit your family for a few days. I'm probably just going to hole up and watch Christmas movies for a few days. She certainly wouldn't be heading out for any more parties, not after tonight. Wesley was silent. That was all right. Sometimes he was quiet. Daphne took another sip of her tea and then dug a spoon into her soup. It was thick and delicious and spicy. After tonight, it felt more comforting than pancakes, and she took several bites of it before she realized Wesley was still silent and still gazing out the window. Wes? He looked over at her, and for some reason, his eyes seemed darker than usual, full of shadows. I'm not going to visit family. No? Too much work to do? She teased, knowing full well that she was his work. Because, I'm sure I'll be fine if you want to fly out for a day. The lines of his mouth thinned, and he looked out the window again, and then back at her. Did I ever tell you how I got into this line of work, Daphne? She frowned, stirring her soup with her spoon idly. I thought you just liked working out and fitness and all that boring crap. He laughed, but there was no pleasure behind it. No, that started afterward. When I was 17, I killed my brother. She froze in place. Silence fell. Daphne stared at him, not sure she'd heard him correctly. You... He nodded slowly. Killed my brother. Drunk driving. I was underage and a heavy drinker. My father was an alcoholic. Had been all his life. I learned to steal his beer and then his whiskey. My older brother did too. We'd ditch school to go drinking. That day we stole a car from the school parking lot and went joyriding.
I was driving and ran off the road into a lake at 90 miles an hour. The car flipped over, and I got out because I didn't buckle up. My brother did.
He stared out the window again.
Broke my leg in 3 places and my arm, but I lived. The court documents said that my blood alcohol was 3 times the legal limit, and it wasn't even a heavy drinking day for me.
She blinked, unsure what to do or say.
I'm sorry, Wesley.
God, that made her problems seem small in comparison. She mostly drank and got high because she was lonely or had self-esteem issues. She'd never killed someone. She thought about Gretchen and Audrey and mentally recoiled. He nodded slowly and gazed down at his food. His spoon moved through his soup, but he wasn't eating.
I was too old for juvie, so I pleaded no contest and went to prison for 2 years. Manslaughter. I sobered up and learned about exercise. When I got out of that controlled environment, though, I immediately fell back into bad habits. It took another year and another car wreck.
He tapped at a faint scar on his brow that she'd noticed but had never asked about.
Before, it got through my head that I was going to die. So I went to rehab and embraced a strict lifestyle because I owed my brother that much. My parents have never forgiven me for his death, though.
Her mouth felt dry. She took another sip of tea.
I don't know what to say, Wesley. I'm not telling you so you can feel sorry for me, Daphne.
His mouth pulled up in one corner, and he shrugged his big shoulders.
I'm telling you so you realize that I understand what you're going through. If I seem hard on you, it's because I've been there. If I seem unfair or unforgiving, it's because I know what it's like. So when I tell you that I know you're not ready,
he reached out and tapped her hand.
I know you're not ready. It's not slagging on you. It's me knowing you better than you know yourself.
I see. I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry, Daff.
Wesley gave her another exasperated look.
If I wanted pity, I'd wear a sign asking for pity. We all make choices. Not all of them are good. It's how you recover that shows what kind of person you are. My life was in the toilet, so I chose a different path. My parents can't forgive me. That's the way they've chosen to handle things. I can't blame them. I chose the original path, and now I'm choosing a different one. And that's why I want to help you, because I've been there, and I understand.
She understood him a bit more now. It was why he always seemed so focused, so very driven. He had a past full of demons driving him. Daphne felt a surge of sympathy and affection for him. Here I thought you were pushing greens on me all the time because you were a sadist.
He snorted. They're good for you, and they don't lead you toward poor choices. It's definitely not because I just like watching you eat carrots all day long.
No, you'd rather watch me eat bananas, she said, taking the conversation back to a lighter note. I have an amazing technique. And she was pleased when his ears pinked with a hint of a blush. The conversation died as they tucked into their soup, but for some reason, hearing his terrible story made Daphne feel less alone, less like a failure. It was nice to know that no matter how much of a fuck-up she was, Wesley understood her. And maybe he wasn't so perfect after all.
Gretchen. Oh my God, I am the worst sister ever.
Daphne.
Good morning?
Gretchen.
I only vaguely remember last night. There was a lot of alcohol, way too much baby oil,
and a vague memory of you leaving and not coming back. Gretchen, sad face. Gretchen, was it me? Am I that annoying to be around when drunk? Gretchen, did someone say something? Do I need to throw down the hammer? Daphne, no. No one hurt my feelings. It was just me. Gretchen, you're sure? Daphne, it was hard, being around all the drinks. I left so I could be strong. Gretchen, oh God, did I think I was a terrible sister before? Because now I feel 10 times worse. Gretchen, you're out of rehab, and I invited you to a bachelorette party. Gretchen, I'm the worst. I'm so sorry. Daphne, it's okay, really. And you had this planned for a long time. I thought it was sweet of you to invite me, regardless. Gretchen, I just wanted to hang together, you know? We never get to anymore now that you're all famous and shit. Daphne, I would love to hang out with you more. I mean it. I'm in NYC for the next few months, and I've been missing family. Will Audrey mind? Gretchen, don't care if she does. I'd shamelessly invite you over to help me bake for tonight's rehearsal dinner, but I suppose that would be too much to ask. Daphne, you're right. That was pretty shameless. Smiley face. Gretchen, I fired the bakers, so I'm going to be non-stop in the kitchen for the next 10 hours, God help me. Daphne, all right. I'll be over there in about an hour or so. Gretchen, you're the best. And bonus, I know you won't eat the stuff while we bake because that sexy trainer of yours is a slave driver. Daphne, hardy har. A drill screeched overhead as Daphne tried to ice a red velvet cupcake, startling her and causing her to nearly drop the bag of frosting in her hands. Oh my God! Gretchen shrieked, her voice growing louder with each word. She shook a spatula at the ceiling. I'm going to straight up murder those jerks if they aren't done by tomorrow. What is all that noise for anyhow? Daphne asked, leaning over one of the cupcakes to carefully pipe a swirl of frosting onto it. She was in charge of decorations, since Gretchen had declared her assistants, with the actual baking, to be more trouble than anything else. She didn't mind. It was fun to just sit in the big kitchen and ice cupcakes, and a bûche de Noël, and more of the croquembouches, and sugar cookie trees. Since it was Christmas, and Gretchen loved to bake, she was loading her guests up with sweets instead of a sit-down dinner. And while Daphne had been tempted at the pudding-filled eggnog cupcakes, she hadn't eaten a bite of the forbidden treats. Last night's close call had been enough for her. She couldn't stop thinking of Wesley and his depressing story. No wonder he was so devoted to his work. He didn't have anything else. That made her sad for him. Didn't he have anyone in the world that cared about him? Other than her, of course. Maybe she'd get him a gift. But what? It was the day before Christmas Eve, and she hadn't shopped. Ugh. Her assistant normally handled everything, but Snoopy had decided to take a month off to visit her family, and Daphne hadn't even thought about the holiday. Then again, she normally didn't have anyone she shopped for, other than coworkers. Water damage, Gretchen declared, angrily whipping egg whites with a whisk. Huh? Daphne looked up from the cupcakes. Gretchen pointed at the ceiling again. Water damage next to Hunter's office. I haven't seen it, but he says it's pretty awful. The crew's been up there for a few weeks now. She shook her head. And Hunter swore to me they'd be done before the wedding, and I'm going to lose my lid if someone starts a drill in the middle of the ceremony. I'm sure they'll be done, Daphne soothed. Weird how she was turning out to be the calm one right now, and Gretchen was the frantic mess. Normally it was the other way around.
I thought about what you said, Gretchen commented, whipping the egg whites again. Huh? About what? About, you know. Gretchen shrugged, her whisk going a mile a minute. About what I would do if I found out there was something wrong. Like, would I break off the wedding, or would it change anything? Oh? She nodded. And I still want to marry him. I trust him. I know he'd never cheat on me, so it can't be something awful. I'm going to trust him and love him and take what comes our way together. Daphne smiled and finished a thick frosting swirl on her cupcake. That sounds wonderful to me. Me too. How about you and Trainer Beefcake? Daphne glanced over at her sister. How do you know he's a beefcake? Because he's a trainer, duh. Good point. Daphne sighed and began to ice another cupcake. I'm pretty much head over heels for him, and he thinks I'm a job. Nothing more. That sucks. Yup. Gretchen paused in her whipping to pour the frothy egg whites into a new bowl. Bring him to dinner tonight and wear something super slinky. Show him the hot, sexy Daphne instead of the gym Daphne. You know how to catch a guy. I've seen you in action. Show him you're interested and he'll be putty in your hands. Daphne paused mid-cupcake. Am I invited to the rehearsal dinner? You are now. Gretchen grinned impishly. It's for family, right? And the good news is that I'm catering it myself, so I can add 2 more to the list. She studied the pan of cupcakes and then made a face. You might want to come armed with carrot sticks, though. I think eggnog is the leanest thing on the menu. Daphne sucked in a breath, studying herself critically in the mirror. The red sheath dress she was trying to pull over her hips was turning out to be more of a challenge than she'd originally thought. She twisted, eyeing the back of the dress. It had a built-in bra and a sheer mesh back that left her almost naked down to her thong, but still had enough material to be somewhat modest. Somewhat. As for the zipper, she couldn't work it on her own no matter how hard she tried. Time to suck it up and call for help. She could do this. She seduced men all the time as Daphne Petty, global superstar. So why did the thought of seducing one rather stoic personal trainer and life coach fill her with worry? Probably because his opinion counted, and not many people's did. And if she screwed this up, she was in danger of losing his friendship, and that terrified her. Daphne was good at wowing people. She wasn't good at keeping them. She studied her reflection in the mirror again, then bit her lip. She could change out of this dress and meet him downstairs and pretend nothing ever happened. Or she could take the bull by the horns. Daphne hesitated, then pointed at her reflection. You've got this, you fierce bitch. Don't forget who you are. With a firm nod at the mirror, she turned and moved to the bedroom door. The Manhattan penthouse she was renting was big, but she knew exactly where Wesley would be. The gym, of course. She sauntered confidently down the hall, as if it were every day that a woman dressed in heels and left the back of her slinky dress open as she wandered around her apartment. Her makeup was perfect, a low-key cat eye, and her hair was pulled into a festive twist, decorated with a big white gift bow. She was all holidayed up, minus the zipper, of course. Now she just needed her date to fall in line. She approached the gym cautiously, peeking in through the door to see what Wesley was up to. He was by the weight rack, a pad of paper in hand, making notes. She knew from working out with him for the past few months that he liked to make careful logs of what he lifted and how many. He was always so cautious, her Wesley. Well, he wasn't hers yet. She just had a lot of hopes. Daphne paused, then took a stealing breath and pushed the doors open. Her expression was casual as she sauntered in. "Hey, Wesley, can you zip me up?" He turned, putting down his notepad, and stopped, blinking. His gaze flicked up and down over her, at the hand holding the front of her dress in place, the tall stiletto shoes gracing her feet, then back to her face. "Sure." She decided not to try and read too much into that small response, turning around and giving him her back and the zipper waiting for attention. He said nothing, but she was intensely aware of his proximity as he grasped the tab of the zipper and slowly pulled it up. "Wanna be my +1 tomorrow?" "Tomorrow?" She played it cool. "I need a date for the wedding." "Oh, sure, I can go." Gee, he didn't exactly sound excited. That was all right, though. At least she wouldn't have to go alone. "Thanks." "Of course." The zipper hummed up her body until it got to her shoulders. "Little tight up here." Oh, God, that was depressing. "I'm too fat?" She desperately tried to reach it, as if her grip could somehow make it zip up. "After all these fucking burpees, I'm too fat for my dress?" "Don't be silly," Wesley said. "It doesn't fit at the shoulders because you're gaining muscle, not fat. You look fantastic, Daphne, and you're looking better every day. Don't be discouraged." So, he thought she looked fantastic? Pleasure rushed through her, and relief. Maybe this wasn't a mistake after all. Maybe she'd been missing subtle hints from him that were there all along. Daphne turned and looked up at him. He was standing so close that she could practically smell the sweat on his skin. It was sexy. She needed to seal the deal then, make sure he knew that she was interested. Her hand went to his shoulder, and she stood on her tiptoes, tilting her mouth toward his. He pulled back, giving her a startled look. "What are you doing, Daphne?" She didn't give up, just tugged a little harder at his shirt to pull him down toward her. "Trying to kiss you?" His gaze flicked to her mouth, then to her face. He took a step backward, and she stumbled to catch herself. "We can't do that." "We can't?" She kept the laugh in her voice, though she felt like dying inside. "I'm your trainer and your life coach," Wesley said in a low, gentle voice. He put his hands on her shoulders and gave them a little squeeze. "I'm your mentor. We should have a relationship full of ultimate trust." "We do." "And that will change if we become romantically involved. Our relationship will change, and I don't think it should because it's working for you. You need strength right now, not a boyfriend." She felt like crying. All these feelings she'd been having for him, all the longing and the closeness, it was clearly one-sided. Why can't I have both? Wesley sighed and dropped his hands. "I didn't want to say anything before the new year, but I suppose now is as good a time as any. I've been talking with the label, and they're super happy with how you've been doing. They feel you're doing well enough to go back to normal. Snoopy's been briefed, and she can take over a lot of my coaching duties, and you can hire a local trainer to come and work out with you a few days a week." Daphne gasped, pulling back. Her hand went to her breast. "You're abandoning me?" Pain flitted over his broad face. "That's not it at all. We knew this was a short-term deal, Daphne. I'm here to help you pick your life back up and put the pieces together. You're doing great, and so we need to cut the cord soon." "I see." The knot in her throat felt enormous. "So, what? You're just going to go back to L.A.? He rubbed his shaved head awkwardly. There's another client lined up for me, currently in rehab, but should get out in February. She felt like crying. So you're leaving me? Like everyone else does. He didn't even smile, didn't even try. He looked as miserable as she felt. You're strong, Daphne. I'm not sure you need me anymore. The choices you've been making lately, they're good ones. You've been focused on your music. Your workouts are excellent. Your eating is on point. You've been working on repairing your relationship with your family. All of these are great things, Daphne. When you removed yourself from the club, that showed me you were ready. The look on his big face was gentle. You don't need me anymore. Was he crazy? The thought of him leaving her, of waking up and not spending the day with him, felt like punishment. It wasn't that she'd miss the workouts or the nagging about carrots. She'd miss his unflagging support, his determination, his attempts to be stern even when she did her best to get a smile out of him. She'd miss their push-pull relationship. She'd miss those rare moments when he touched her hand, or the quiet evenings when they just talked for hours. She was losing her best friend, and the person she was closest to in the world, all because she finally had her act together. It didn't seem fair. So, what will it take to make you stay with me for another year? A relapse? Should I go buy some coke and snort it? Or is weed enough of a gateway drug? What about a beer? The words felt ugly and bitter as she said them, but she couldn't seem to stop. Or how about a chocolate bar? A fucking cupcake? Because I've been good and clean, and clearly all it's going to get me in the end is nothing. The look on his face was incredibly sad, and she immediately regretted the words. You don't mean that, Daphne. You can't be clean because I want you to be. You have to be clean because you choose to be. I know. I fucking know. She pinched the bridge of her nose. Her head hurt. Hell, her heart hurt worse. She was ready to cry, but she couldn't without redoing her makeup. If there was one thing she'd learned after years of being in show business, it was how to hold back the tears. I wasn't trying to hurt you, Daphne. He reached for her. She shook her head and jerked away. Forget it, Wesley. Never mind. I have a party to go to tonight. She adjusted the ill-fitting dress. One that may or may not have obscene quantities of chocolate. Want to be my date tonight, too? The somber look he gave her broke her heart. You think I should? I think if you're not, you won't be able to know if I'm any good. And I don't have much of an incentive to be good at the moment, it seems. She whirled around and stomped away. He caught her hand and stopped her after a few paces. Daff. Stop it, Wesley. Damn it, she really was going to cry at this rate. You're making this about me, he said. It's not about me. It's not about eating chocolate or doing drugs to get back at me because I can't kiss you. It needs to be about love. When her eyebrows went up, he pointed at his chest. Not for this person. He reached out and tapped her breastbone. For this person. When was the last time you loved her, Daphne? Shit. Now she really was going to cry. She wrestled her hand out of his grip. Don't need more of your life coach bullshit right now, thanks, she said hoarsely. See you later. Or not. Feel free to leave since we're done here. I'll still be your date tomorrow. Whatever. This time when she walked away, he let her go, and somehow that made things worse. For this person. When was the last time you loved her, Daphne? God, why did everything he say hit like a cannonball? When was the last time she loved herself? She passed a mirror as she grabbed her coat, heading out of the apartment. She looked good, she supposed, but all she saw were the freckles that had given endless makeup artists issues. She saw the fine, limp hair that had made costume designers demand she wear wigs. She saw the figure that was too thick, and now too muscled, to be anything but heavily photoshopped on an album cover. She saw a thin upper lip that needed injections, a jawline that a producer had once told her made her face look more like an egg than anything. She saw tits that weren't big enough for the actor she'd dated once, and a stomach that was far too big for the producer she'd slept with for a few months. She saw bared arms that the tabloids would have a field day with if they showed a bit of jiggle, and thighs that had strong quads but would probably be photoshopped into one of those worst bikini bodies issues if they ever made the light of day. Daphne touched her face, thoughtful and sad. When had she stopped seeing a person in the mirror and started seeing just a bunch of broken parts? Why couldn't she just love the music and have it be about that anymore? She knew that the label was already planning on doing an art shot to hide her bigger body. She knew what an art shot was. It was going to be a close-up of her hair or face, and not much else, to hide the fact that she was no longer a size 0, but a size 10. Fat, according to everyone in L.A., except for Wesley, who only cared about whether she was building muscle and putting the right things in her body. Oh, Wesley, why couldn't he love her enough to give her a chance? If he couldn't love her, how could he possibly expect her to love herself? She shoved her arms into her coat and headed out the door. Time to go celebrate someone else's happy ever after. Funny how she was the most successful out of her sisters, and yet was the only one that couldn't seem to find love. Very early the next day, Gretchen stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Today, she was getting married. Today, she was going to be one half of Mr. and Mrs. Buchanan. Today, Hunter's secret would come out. It had to. It was their wedding day. And she would have to deal with the consequences, one way or another. And if it didn't come out, well, she'd have to deal with the consequences of that too. She looked over at the love of her life. He slept, face on the pillow next to hers, his hands between them as if ready to touch her, or shelter her if she needed it. The scars on his face were shadows in the moonlight, making him look haggard, but to her, he was beautiful. She loved him, and she was utterly terrified. Terrified that maybe she was making a mistake, and his secret would be as awful as she dreaded. Terrified that her wedding was going to be a monstrosity of Christmas and whatever else she'd thrown in there. Terrified that something awful was going to go wrong after a year of planning and obsessing. Terrified that he'd get to the altar and decide that actually, no, he wasn't interested in marrying a loudmouth, not all that put together redhead. Because living together was one thing, but marriage was a big deal. And they had no prenuptial agreement. She'd been the one that suggested it, because she didn't want him to think she was after his money. He'd scoffed at the idea, and when she'd brought it up again, he'd gotten angry at her. So she'd let it die, but now she worried. If he married her, he had to really, really want to marry her, warts and all, because she'd be entitled to a crap load of his money once the ring was on her finger. And, well, that made her nervous. What if he changed his mind? What if he resented that she hadn't pushed harder? What if? She slid out of bed as carefully as possible so she wouldn't wake Hunter. It didn't work. His fingers immediately brushed over her arm. Gretchen, His voice was a sexy, sleepy mumble that made her quiver all over.
"Gonna start the bread," she told him. "I have to have it in the proofing drawer for a while, so I need to begin early."
His thumb grazed over her skin in a gentle caress. "You okay, love?"
"Yep, just thinking about baking."
She leaned over and gave him a quick kiss.
"Go back to sleep."
By the time she had her slippers and robe on, Hunter was already deep asleep again. She felt a surge of love for him. And then she felt the anxiety return. Time to go pound some dough. An hour or so later, she had 6 bowls full of dough rising for panettone loaves, a coffee in hand, and her mind still wouldn't turn off. She felt dangerously out of control, like the calm before the storm that was going to hit later. Her stomach was full of dread, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to go wrong. Something always did, didn't it? She took her coffee and headed to her private study down the hall. It was the closest study to her favorite kitchen, and she kept her recipes and doodles in the room. She also kept Igor's favorite bed in there, and he was curled up, sleeping, when she went in. Gretchen went to her cat and absently stroked his velvety ears. Her wedding gift was here. The painting she'd had Sebastian, one of Hunter's friends and one of his groomsmen, commission was finally finished, and she gazed at it, full of worry. The painting itself was amazing. It was an oil portrait of her, on her stomach on a bed of satin, with the sheets artfully hiding her nudity. Sebastian had somehow managed to make her look flirty and sexy, instead of the frizzy mess she normally felt she was. Her hair had a soft, tousled flip to it, and the look in her eyes was come hither as she gazed out of the portrait. Gretchen worried it didn't represent her, and maybe it wasn't enough of a wedding present. She was marrying a freaking billionaire. He was used to lavish gifts. He had 10 cars of his own, and at least that many houses. A frisson of worry skittered down her spine. The man could buy whatever he wanted. Would he be expecting something more for their wedding/Christmas than a portrait of her painted by his buddy? Uh-oh. Was she giving him the adult equivalent of a homemade present because she'd had his friend do the picture? Was she being a narcissist by giving him a picture of her? Oh, God. What if it wasn't enough of a present for Christmas? Like maybe it covered the wedding part of the day, but not the Christmas part. Why did she have to slop her wedding onto Christmas like some sort of idiot? Why couldn't she have waited until mid-January or February? Did it matter? Except things had dragged on for so long that she was desperate. She wanted to marry Hunter, and she worried that the more it got delayed, the more it gave him a chance to change his mind about her. "I think I'm going to throw up, Igor," she whispered. The cat thumped his naked, wiry little tail, irritated. Yeah, that was about right. Even the cat found her irritating right now. She gave his ears one final rub, and then moved to the window seat with her coffee. A quick peek out into the night showed that it was snowing, and snowing hard. Because of course it was. It was Christmas Eve, and no sane person would be up at 4 a.m. for baking. Snow shouldn't matter around a holiday because people stayed home in their pajamas. But no, she'd just had to have her wedding today of all days. Did Hunter have a snowplow? Why was it she hadn't thought about snowplows in her contingency plans? She'd thought of everything else, hadn't she? Her phone buzzed. Daphne. I know it's early, but I can't sleep. Let me know if you want some baking company. She nearly wept at the sight of the text message. It was wonderful having Daphne back, if only so she had one more person to freak out to. She texted back quickly. Not too early, and I'm making panettones, so you're welcome to come join me. Daphne. What? Never mind. I'll come over regardless. You're up early, though. Can't sleep? Gretchen. Anxiety is driving me slowly insane. Daphne. Ah, it's cute that you somehow think it was a slow process. Gretchen snorted. Daphne. You just gotta get through today, big sis. Be there as soon as I can get a cab. Gretchen. 'Kay, thanks, Daph. You just gotta get through today. Easier said than done. She set her coffee down and went to go hug her cat, but he ran away. God, she hoped that wasn't a bad sign. Today was going to be fine, wasn't it? Things got worse with every hour that passed, and given that she wasn't getting married until 2 in the afternoon, that left a hell of a lot of hours for shit to go wrong. Next time she got married on Christmas Eve, Gretchen decided she'd have the ceremony super early so she can relax for the rest of the day. Gretchen had been so nervous with the wedding preparations that she'd forgotten to add yeast to her panettones, and as a result, she'd had to throw away all 6 batches and start over. The snow continued to pour down, the outside of Buchanan Manor a wintry wonderland that would have been perfect if Gretchen hadn't been expecting over 200 guests to show up. At 9 in the morning, the wedding cake's middle tier collapsed. At 9:30, she got the call that the minister was stranded in Boston, his flight canceled. At 10, her hairdresser called and said her car had been buried by a snowplow and she couldn't make it. Her makeup lady called not 10 minutes later, citing the same problem. On a hunch, she tried on her wedding dress. The waist was too tight. After months of trying to diet, she'd gained weight. Gained! It had to be all the cakes and cookies and croquembouches she'd been worrying over. She had to taste them, of course, and she'd been tasting a lot of stuff. And now she was too fat for her dress, somehow, despite having a final fitting 2 days ago. After that, she locked herself in her room for a nice long cry. After all, what did it fucking matter what she looked like? She was going to be a hag under her veil. She could fit into it, at least. Should we do something? Daphne whispered, as the soft sound of Gretchen's weeping echoed into the hallway outside her bedroom door. Like what? Greer, the very pregnant, very tiny bridesmaid, gave Daphne a concerned look. I'm used to dealing with brides and bridezilla actions, but this is just beyond. She clutched her planning guide and gave a worried sigh. I know she's been stressing about things, but she always has a laugh when I ask about it. I didn't realize she was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Taylor pressed her fingers to her lips, concerned. Should we change out of our bridesmaid gowns? Is the wedding canceled? No, don't change. I'm sure this will pass, Greer said quickly, and gave Daphne another uneasy glance. Where's Audrey? Sick, Daphne said. Her twin had arrived, baby and gorgeous husband in tow, and immediately headed to the bathroom to puke. Apparently she was having a round of both morning sickness and food poisoning, which made her useless for helping out with Gretchen's nerves. The other bridesmaids were standing around, looking at Daphne as if she'd know what to do. Well, crap. She'd have to try something. They were sisters. If friends wouldn't work right now, the least she could do was try to coax Gretchen out. So she knocked on the door. Gretch? Hey, it's Daph. Let me in so we can talk. Fuck off, came the weepy voice from the other side of the door. Everyone fuck off. I'm never coming out. That's a bit dramatic, don't you think? Daphne said, giving the worried bridesmaids a smile, like she had it all handled. Don't care. I'm just going to die in here old and alone. Oh, yeah. Gretchen definitely loved her drama. Daphne rapped her knuckles on the door again. You won't talk to me about what's going on? What about Audrey? Daph would get her a barf bucket and park her in front of the door if that was what it took to make Gretchen emerge.
This was the wedding day. There wasn't time for hysterics. But the threat of Audrey only made Gretchen cry harder. Perhaps Hunter? Bronte suggested quietly. Daphne had just come to the same conclusion herself. She nodded and backed away from the door. Sometimes the best person to talk to was the one you had the most invested in, emotionally. Even if what they would say would devastate you, sometimes it had to be said. Just look at me and Wesley. She pondered this as she walked through the halls of Buchanan Manor. She felt weirdly better after confessing how she felt to Wesley. She'd been turned down, and that hurt. And he was leaving her, and that hurt too. But it was out in the open. She didn't have to hide how she felt anymore. It felt like another mask she'd been wearing all this time, and now it was gone, and she felt good. Her heart hurt, and she'd cried bitter tears last night after the rehearsal dinner. And a few when Gretchen and Hunter had exchanged sweet looks with each other. But today she felt cleansed. Whole, hurting, but cleansed. If he didn't love her back, well, she couldn't make him. And if Gretchen was having second thoughts about getting married, then she needed to tell Hunter before things got too far along and became messier than they already were. The house had been decorated with delicate holiday touches, and every table she passed was filled with roses. Purple roses, pink roses, red roses. They must have had some sort of significance to Gretchen and Hunter, though Daphne didn't know what it could be. Maybe Gretchen had developed a thing for roses. Maybe Hunter sent Gretchen a lot of roses when they were dating. God, if Gretchen had changed her mind about marrying Hunter, he'd be devastated. She'd met the man last night at the rehearsal dinner for the first time. He hadn't been what she'd been expecting. The scars were deeper and more brutal than she'd originally thought, and the man under them was stern and rather unforgiving looking. It made her feel like a naughty child when she was in his presence, for all that he was probably only a few years older than Gretchen. But it had also been very clear to Daphne that he fucking worshipped Gretchen with all of his being. Every look he cast in her direction, every possessive touch, every gesture, all of it made it clear that he was utterly addicted to Gretchen Petty and would do anything for her. Which made it even more confusing that things had gone wrong somehow. The endless maze of halls that made up Buchanan Manor were cordoned off with red velvet ropes so guests wouldn't stray, and Daphne found herself rushing toward the back of the house. There were massive double doors that servants opened, and a covered enclosed walkway that kept guests safe, well, relatively, from the blizzard that had decided to storm. She headed inside the big greenhouse that had, for some reason, been elected to be where the vows would be recited. As she walked in, she was hit by a wall of heat. A generator chugged somewhere in the distance, and fans blew warm air on the guests in the massive tent. Folding chairs had been set up in neat rows, and about half the chairs were full. At the front, a rose-encrusted archway was starting to wilt under the heaters, and two men stood on the small decorative stairs below the arch. One was Hunter, and he seemed to be arguing with another man who wore a suit. In the front row, she made out Wesley's broad shoulders. He'd shown up after all, despite the blowout from yesterday. She was a little surprised. He'd braved holiday traffic and the driving snow just to be her platonic date. It would have been sweet if it had meant something to him. Instead, it just made her ache. They were just friends, and that was all they would ever be. The bittersweet disappointment returned, and she marched up the aisle, heading for the groom. "Audrey, you're not dressed," someone called out. Whoops. Daphne was still in her jeans and not wearing makeup and didn't have her hair fixed. Of course they'd mistake her for Audrey. She held up a finger, indicating she needed a moment. That seemed easier than explaining, and she rushed to Hunter's side and touched his sleeve. He turned, and his ugly, scarred face focused on her. Immediately, he went still. "What's wrong?" "I know you're not supposed to see the bride before the wedding, but Gretchen won't come out of her room to get dressed. She's crying, and she won't talk to anyone. I think something's really wrong." Hunter paled and then raced down the aisle. Gretchen's nose wouldn't stop running. Sure, it might have had something to do with the fact that she couldn't stop crying, but the nose dripping was really bothering her. Taking the delicate mirror on her makeup table, she studied her reflection before wadding Kleenex into a nose plug and then stuffing it into one nostril. The tuft of tissue stuck out underneath her nose like a ridiculous flower, and she shoved a matching tissue in the other nostril. The woman that stared back at her from the other side of the mirror was a mess. Her hair was a nest of tangles, her face ruddy from crying. Her nose was stretched out from the tissue, and her wedding dress was a crumpled heap around her shoulders because it wouldn't fasten in the back. She'd thrown her veil on at some point, and it hung crookedly over one side of her head. She looked ridiculous, but what did it matter? Her eyes felt hot and swollen, and Gretchen gave her reflection another unhappy look before pushing the mirror away. Of course she looked like hell. It was just icing on top of the terrible shit cake that had turned out to be her wedding. The wedding she'd tried so hard to make perfect and had failed miserably at in every aspect. Someone knocked at the door to her dressing room, and she felt a surge of irritation. Why couldn't they leave her alone to have her pity party? For the millionth time, go away! She heard a soft murmur on the other side of the door, and what sounded like people leaving. Good. She knew all her bridesmaids and best friends were crowded outside the door, but she didn't want to see them right now. She didn't want to see anyone. She put her head down on the arm of the chaise she was moping on and closed her eyes. The lock clicked. Gretchen sat up, frowning. Who was the asshole? Hunter's broad shoulders filled the doorway, and he shut the door carefully behind him. His gaze fixed on Gretchen, and her first thought was how incredibly handsome he was in his tuxedo. God, she was a lucky woman to be able to tap that on a regular basis. She loved every inch of him, from the white scars bisecting his brows to the way his mouth firmed into a flat line when he saw something that displeased him, like it was doing right now. He locked the door behind him again and then strode toward her. "Gretchen, sweetheart, what's wrong?" Oh, man, and here she had tissue shoved up her nose. Could this day get any worse? Could she be any less sexy? "You're not supposed to see me before the wedding." "Yes, but you're telling everyone that there won't be a wedding, and your friends are panicking." He sat down on the chaise next to her and gently plucked one of the tissues from her nose. "Do you need to talk?" "Oh, my God, don't do that, Hunter. That's so gross." She snatched the tissue from him and furtively pulled the other one out and then rubbed her nostrils. "This is not a sexy moment." "Every moment with you doesn't have to be a sexy moment," Hunter said, in that grave, deep voice of his. "Just as long as it's with you." Damn. Just like that, her eyes welled up, and she began to cry once more. "Stop being so understanding!" "Gretchen, love." He pulled her against him, crinkling swaths of white taffeta skirts and all, and brushed the veil and tangled hair out of her face. "What's happened to my impulsive, silly, happy woman?" "She's been replaced by a psycho hose beast," Gretchen sobbed.
She curled her fists against his chest and then reared back. I shouldn't touch you. I'll mess up your suit. Fuck the suit. He patted his shoulder. I'm yours to cry on. And because that was so sweet, she launched into a fresh round of tears, crying into the lapels of his nice pressed tuxedo. I wanted our wedding to be perfect, and it's such a mess. She cried harder, because saying it out loud just made it that much more true. The cake is ruined, and my croquembouches won't stay together, and my dress won't fucking fit, and it's a blizzard outside, And I'm here, Hunter said gently, stroking her cheek. And you're here, and we're the only ones that matter. I know I'm a train wreck, Gretchen sniffed. I know I don't think about things before plowing ahead, and I thought with the wedding that I'd get things right for a change. I'd planned for months so nothing would surprise me at the last minute. I dieted. I tried to go with the flow. I really did. And the more I tried, the worse things got. Is that why you've been so worried lately? You're trying to impress me? He seemed stunned. Well, yeah. I mean, you're awesome, Hunter. You're rich and powerful and smart, and you are so put together. You work really long hours and you're really good at your job. I can't seem to keep a damn job. And how the hell am I going to do a cookbook when I can't even bake properly for my own wedding? Her lower lip quivered, and then she pressed her face against his chest again. My wedding cake collapsed. That's what I get for trying to give it a pudding center. Pudding center? I thought you went with lemon. Yeah, but lemon was plain and boring, and I didn't want our wedding to be boring. She was going to start crying again. I wanted you to be impressed with me, Hunter, like you could look at me and be proud of who you were marrying, and then it wouldn't feel like a mistake. A mistake? He pulled back, his fingers searching for her chin to force her to look at him. Gretchen, where is all this coming from? How could you possibly think this is a mistake? Because I'm a questionably employed woman with nothing to bring to the table, and you're a sexy billionaire? Hello, you can do so much better than me. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. He cupped her face, her teary, swollen, runny-nosed face. I love you, Gretchen. You're the first person that ever saw me, really saw me. Most everyone else just pretends not to notice the scars or avoids making eye contact. But you never let me fade into the shadows. You keep pulling me into the light, and you've given me a new life and new friends. How can I not love you with every inch of my body? How can I not want to be with you forever? Of course I want to marry you. Her lips started to wobble again. And don't cry. He leaned in and gave her a quick kiss on the mouth. I love wild, impulsive, silly Gretchen. This anxious, frantic Gretchen who's trying to cater her own wedding, she's going to have a nervous breakdown. Going to? I think I'm there. She managed a watery chuckle and burrowed against him. Him being here already made her feel 1,000,000 times better. This was why they were perfect for each other. He completed her. He knew her. He understood her, and he could talk her down off of the impulsive ledges that she managed to find herself on. Gretchen sighed, snuggling up against him. A Christmas wedding. I think I really must be crazy. Oh, and I screwed Christmas, too. I got you a wedding present and no Christmas present. I'm officially the worst wife ever. I don't care about presents. You're the only thing I want today. He kissed her again. And you can't keep things like this from me, love. She gasped and pulled back.
You want to talk about keeping things from people? You're the one with the big secret that's stressing me out.
His brows furrowed. My secret?
Oh my God, don't even pretend that you have no idea. I know that woman's blackmailing you.
Hunter's look grew more puzzled. Blackmailing me? Who?
The one that showed up at your office earlier this week and brought photos.
She studied him. He really did seem confused at her accusation. I guess it's not blackmail after all? He looked angry, of all things. You really think I'm being blackmailed? Why would you keep something like that to yourself? Why wouldn't you come talk to me? Because I wanted to marry you, she whispered. For better or for worse, I wanted you to be mine. The hard line of his mouth softened. Gretchen. I know. I'm crazy, and now you don't want to marry me, right? I love you, and I can't believe you've made yourself so much to worry about over the last few months. He gave her an exasperated look and took her hand in his, then kissed the palm. I'd throw you down on this sofa and demonstrate just how much I want you to be my wife, but I need to show you something first.
Ah, that's kind of disappointing, Gretchen said, getting to her feet. I wouldn't mind you throwing me down on the sofa and demonstrating either.
The look he gave her was heated, but he took her hand and tugged her forward. This is important. Come on. She took a few steps and then paused. Her dress wasn't hanging right, the waist uncinched.
I can't. My dress won't close. It's just another thing I've failed at.
Hunter shrugged off his tuxedo jacket.
No, baby, that's your tux.
The look he gave her silenced her protests, and she let him put his jacket around her shoulders and tuck it against her. Truth be told, she liked that he was taking care of her. She always had. Normally, she was so caught up in her own storms that she forgot how nice it was to sit back and let Hunter take control for a bit. So she was silent as she slid her arms through the oversized sleeves. When he offered his hand, she took it. They emerged from the room hand in hand, and Gretchen cringed as they went down the hall, half expecting to see a flurry of worried bridesmaids. It was only Daphne waiting, though, her phone in hand. The others are scattering for a bit, she explained as they passed. If anyone asks, you two are having a few moments to yourself and can't be disturbed. And she winked at Gretchen, like everything was under control. Heck, maybe it was. Gretchen nodded slowly and let Hunter tug her along. It wasn't until they got to the second floor where his office was that she got curious. The door next to his, normally his personal gym, was covered with plastic thanks to the repairs. Is there more wrong with the house? She asked, as he reached for the plastic and began to pull it back. Is the water damage worse than you said? What? He tore the plastic sheeting back and gestured inside. She went in, releasing his hand. The lights were off, and she fumbled for the light switch and then flicked it on. As the lights fluttered into existence, she gasped. It was her dream kitchen. Ina Garten's white, chic kitchen from her TV show had been lovingly recreated. Tall cabinets sat empty of the decorative kitchenware that Ina had on her show, and the black-topped white bar didn't have the stools in front of it yet. The stove was missing, but the twin refrigerator cabinets were perfection. As she walked into the kitchen, she saw the twin dishwashers under the island. Her hand moved over the countertop, skimming the cool stone. What? What is this? It's supposed to be the kitchen on that TV show you like so much, but the contractors have been dragging their damned feet for so long that it's only half done. The one here, that is, he added. The one in Kata Bay is fully completed.
She pulled open one of the refrigerator cabinets and sighed with pleasure. A Sub-Zero fridge. How lovely. I'm sorry, what did you say? She turned back to Hunter, his words registering. What's Kata Bay? Kata Bay is my private island that I bought. You bought a private island? For us. He moved forward and pulled his phone out of his pocket, thumbing through a few things before he found what he was searching for, and handed the phone to her. He'd opened a series of photos, and as she flicked through them, she saw the house he'd designed, the sandy beach and the private dock, the opulent tropical bedroom, and even the deluxe kitchen that was a completed mirror to the one she was standing in right now. You bought an island, she said faintly, and made a third kitchen in the house. Why? This kitchen, he said, pointing at the counter, is because I miss you when you're downstairs and not near me. Maybe I'm fucking clingy or needy, but I don't care. I like having you nearby. I like hearing you cuss at the bread when it doesn't rise like you want it to. I like hearing you tinker around. I like knowing that you're only a few feet away for me to come and touch you. He moved to her side, his hand sliding to her neck and caressing her nape. I'm addicted to you, and I don't give a crap if that makes me needy. It makes you awesome, she said softly, smoothing a hand down the front of his shirt. God, I love you. So this is the big secret? This kitchen and a private island? At his nod, she gave an incredulous little laugh. Why a private island? Because you need a vacation from all of this. The wedding, the cookbook. Everything has stressed you out so much that I worry about you. So, when I saw the island come up for sale, I thought it'd be perfect for us to have our own private getaway. But the house is private. Ah, but if I sweep you off to a tropical island, you'll have no choice but to relax and lounge about in skimpy clothing. Gretchen laughed again. That is the most ridiculous and most wonderful thing I've ever heard. She put her arms around his neck and pressed her breasts against his chest. I can't believe you kept all this from me and made me think the house had water damage. Do you know how long I've been freaking out over the drilling and hammering they've been doing? I know, and you've been making yourself utterly crazy. You didn't need more on your plate to worry about, and I know you. You'd have worried about the contractors hitting their deadlines and making everything the way you wanted it. So I decided to handle it. His hands rubbed up and down her arms. Besides, I worried me putting a kitchen up here would make you think I'm a stalker. Not a stalker if I marry you, Gretchen teased. I don't care if you're needy. I love you, and I need you, too. You can't keep making yourself insane with all this stuff, Gretchen. I'm a billionaire. I can buy my woman a kitchen if I want. I can buy her an island if I want. What's the point of all this money if we can't enjoy ourselves? The lump in her throat grew. He was really the best man ever. I love you. I love you too, always. We need to be good, you and I. I don't know what I'll do if something happened to tear us apart. His scarred brow moved in a quasi-arch. You mean like blackmail? Her hand rubbed up and down his front again. Heaven help her, she was a mess right now, and she was getting all turned on. I was going to marry you, even if some bitch was trying to get between us. I said for better or for worse, and I meant it. No matter what she had to say, I still wanted to be Mrs. Buchanan. There's nothing so awful that would drive me away from you. Gretchen, he murmured, voice hoarse with emotion. You're everything to me. Do you understand that? She nodded.
I think I just got too caught up in the wedding and trying to make it amazing. I might have let things get to my head. He caressed her neck and pulled her close for a quick kiss, then said, "We could elope, forget all this and bail out, head to a JP and then to our island." "I'm going to forget you said any of that," she whispered against his mouth, "because I might have to kill you for thinking about abandoning the wedding we've set up at your house." "Fuck the wedding," he murmured and kissed her again. His tongue flicked against her lips, sending skitters of lust through her body. "Fuck the guests. Fuck the house. I'll burn the thing to the damn ground if it'll make you happy." Oh my God, when did arson become so damn sexy? "Can we put that in the wedding vows?" "Absolutely." He kissed her again, then bit down gently on her plump lower lip. "Go back to being my impulsive, heedless Gretchen. Let me be the planner, the worrier. You just be you. You're perfect as you are." "All right," she said shyly, feeling loved and special and so stupidly happy all at once. "And if you try to plan anything of this magnitude again, I'm going to kidnap you to our island." Gretchen giggled. "Deal." "Okay, I think we're good," Daphne said, as she moved away from Gretchen's back. "Let me know what you think." Gretchen twisted, trying to get a look at her back in the mirror. An hour ago, the dress had been unable to close, the zipper and clasps unwilling to move over her mid-back. Now, as she peered in the mirror at the deep V of the back of the dress, it looked perfect. "You're a genius, Daph! What did you do?" "I ripped open the dress and hot-glued an extra stretchy panel under each armpit to give you a bit more room." Audrey gasped. "You did what?" "You wanted it to fit, right? It fucking fits." Daphne smoothed a hand down Gretchen's back. "No gaps in the zipper. It's a trick I learned on the road. My costumes were always getting screwed up, and they're always making last-minute modifications with a glue gun. That's how it works. And it's not like she's going to wear the dress again." "But still—" "Nope, she's right, Audrey. It looks great." Gretchen admired her reflection again. "You even got the wrinkles out of the skirts. How'd you manage that?" "Flat iron," Daphne said proudly. "It does look good," Audrey admitted. "And you look gorgeous, Gretchen." She felt gorgeous, too. Gretchen gazed at her reflection again. This morning's nervous breakdown didn't show. While Daphne had fixed her dress, she'd sat with Audrey and pressed chilled cucumber slices to her eyes to reduce the swelling. Hunter's friend, Cade Archer, had shown up for the wedding at that point, and Bronte had remembered that his wife, Kylie, was a makeup artist. She'd even worked for Daphne in the past. Kylie had been happy to help fix Gretchen's makeup, though she'd tisked at some of the products Gretchen had on hand. By the time Kylie was done, Gretchen had a laundry list of new products to buy to help her skin in the future. But she looked good. Her eyes had been heavily shadowed, since Kylie said that heavy eye makeup showed up best in photos. She had false lashes on, her eyes were lined to perfection, her brows transformed, and the delicate pop of pink on her lips was a thing of beauty. Her hair had been wrangled into a low bun, her hair smoothed by Daphne and Kylie's combined efforts. The off-the-shoulder bodice now fit snugly, the small cap sleeves looking like delicate embellishments, rather than as if they were struggling to hold up the yards of her dress. The waist dipped into a deep V, the edges beaded, and then splashed out into her massive skirt of layered tulle and taffeta. It was princessy, and probably the wrong look for a woman her size, but she didn't care. She loved it, and now that it fit again, and Hunter loved her, and everything she'd been worrying about was no big deal after all was right in the world.
Well, her cake was crap, and the croquembouches were more like crocum avalanches, but she didn't care. She was getting married to Hunter today, and everything else that had tried to stop her could go suck a dick. She loved that man. He'd even offered to let her keep wearing his jacket, and they could get married just like that. But the photographer had made his way there, despite the driving snow, and she wanted pictures of them looking their best, not her looking like a train wreck. And Daphne had been wonderful today. Gretchen hadn't realized how much she'd missed her sister, but Daphne had been at her side throughout this long, distressing day. She turned and took Daphne's hand, giving it a squeeze. I love that you're here today, and I'm so glad you're back in my life. Daphne's eyes looked suspiciously shiny. Really? Really? Me too, Audrey said, and moved forward to put her hand over their joined ones. I know I've been reluctant to let you back in, but I'm very proud of how you're doing, and I'm glad that you reached out. Daphne sniffed. Thanks, guys. I know I burned a lot of bridges in the past, but I'm doing my best to make you proud. Then she shook her head. No, I take that back. I'm doing my best to make me proud. That's all I've ever wanted for you, Audrey said. Well, this isn't all I want, Gretchen declared, before the moment got too sappy and she wept all over her excellent makeup. I want you to be in the wedding. We can squeeze another bridesmaid in, I'm sure. It'll throw shit off, but who cares? Daphne shook her head. There's a reason I'm not in the wedding, Gretchen. I haven't been part of your story for the last few years. Then I want you to be part of it for the future. Absolutely. Gretchen flung her arms out. Group hug! It was going to be a lovely wedding, Daphne decided. She was feeling fine after she'd left Gretchen's side and changed into her simple beige sheath dress and slipped into her seat next to Wesley. He reached for her hand and squeezed it. Holding hands? After her recent confession? She figured it was because he thought she'd need the moral support, which was funny because she was feeling pretty good overall. It hurt that she didn't have Wesley, but she'd survive. She was strong, like he'd said. Strong, healthy, and happy for her sister. One of Hunter's friends, Jonathan, had become ordained in his extensive travels and was filling in for the absent minister. The greenhouse had been decorated with roses of varying delicate colors, but the pale, delicate, bluish-purple roses lined the aisle and matched the color of the bridesmaids' dresses. There wasn't much Christmas decor in the greenhouse, except for the occasional white poinsettia at the end of each row, and artful ribbons reserving chairs up front for special friends. Then the music started, and Daphne's composure crumbled the moment Pachelbel's Canon in D began to play. Wesley pressed a soft cloth handkerchief into her hand, and she took it, swiping at her eyes. Hunter stood at the front of the redecorated greenhouse, a rather ardent expression on his scarred face as he stared down the aisle, waiting for his bride. The look he wore wasn't stoic, Daphne thought. It wasn't nervous either. It was burning with intensity, like he couldn't wait for his bride to arrive into his arms. That was sweet. Greer was the first bridesmaid to come down the aisle. Each one wore a lovely pale blue-purple dress in a different cut and carried a bouquet of white roses. Greer was heavily pregnant, but glowing with happiness, and sneaking peeks at the man on her arm, Asher Sutton. Next came Sebastian and Chelsea, both tall and gorgeous. Then Taylor and Locke. Taylor tripped on the carpet, but Locke's strong arm caught her, and she erupted in embarrassed giggles before taking her place next to the other bridesmaids at the front. Then came Magnus and Edie. the latter's steps slow and deliberate to minimize her limp. Their fingers lingered together for a moment after they separated, and Daphne wondered if something was going on there. Then came Bronte on the arm of Rhys, Audrey's husband. After that, it was the maid of honor and the best man. Audrey, Daphne's glowing, radiantly happy twin, walked slowly down the aisle on the arm of Logan Hawkins, Hunter's best friend and Bronte's husband. Time seemed to inch past as the bridal party moved into place, and the intense look in Hunter's eyes intensified. Then the music changed. Etta James's At Last poured from the speakers. Gretchen appeared at the end of the aisle, the waterfall bouquet of pale blue-purple roses cascading down from her hands. Her veil shielded her features, but even from her seat, Daphne could see the radiant smile on her face. The tears pretty much fell like rain at that point. She cried when Gretchen walked down the aisle and arrived in front of her groom, who, for the first time since she'd met him, was wearing a wide smile. She cried when Hunter lifted Gretchen's veil and his fingers caressed her cheek as he did. She cried when they joined hands and said their vows, and Gretchen promised to smack that ass as often as possible, and Hunter's ears turned red. She wept when they exchanged rings and vowed to love each other forever, and she cried a little more when they kissed, and then Gretchen and Hunter were married. And she might have cried a little more when the party moved to the reception hall, a big banquet area set up in one of Buchanan Manor's many, many rooms, because Gretchen immediately made a beeline to Daphne and hugged her. She managed to keep her composure when the sad, collapsed wedding cake was brought out and the bride and groom fed each other. It didn't matter that the cake was ugly. Everyone declared it was utterly delicious. Then, to Daphne's dismay, the band began to play, the bar was opened, and people began to eat and drink. She tensed, feeling the uncomfortable, unwanted craving rack through her. Just one drink, just one cupcake. She watched as her twin, Audrey, picked up a bowl of the wrecked croquembouche balls and popped one into her husband's mouth, laughing as Rhys juggled the baby. Yeah, that was pretty much a trifecta of things she couldn't have. Sweets, drinks, and a man that loved her. She sighed. Gretchen and Hunter moved out onto the dance floor as the band began to play Ed Sheeran's Thinking Out Loud, and then a hand slid to Daphne's waist. "You look like you need to get away," Wesley murmured into her ear. Daphne shivered because he was so close she could smell his aftershave and feel the warmth of his body. That obvious? Only to someone who knows you and knows what you've been through. Am I a bad sister to leave the party early? He shook his head and gave her waist a squeeze. The only bad sister would be the one that didn't understand why you wanted to leave. A wistful stab moved through her as she saw Gretchen and Hunter press their foreheads together, dancing close. It isn't that I want to leave at all. A server walked past with flutes of champagne, and that awful gnawing returned to her belly. But I need to. She'll understand, Wesley said gently, and steered her out of the ballroom. A short time later, they were in a car heading back to the city. The sun had come out, despite the torrential snow earlier in the day, and the roads were turning slushy. The driver cussed as he drove, but he went slow. "We might be here for a while," he called back to them. "Hope you ain't in a hurry." "We aren't, thank you," she smiled at him. "Merry Christmas," he called back. then turned the radio up to give them a little privacy. Bing Crosby's voice filled the quiet car, and the driver rolled the window up, muffling the music. Daphne leaned back against the seat, gazing out at the blinding, melting snow. Maybe she'd have herself a merry little Christmas after all. She had family again, for the first time in what felt like forever. She was strong and on the road to recovery, however strict. And she was with someone she loved, even if it wasn't returned. She glanced over at Wesley and was surprised to see the look on his face was troubled. She knew him well enough to know that when his brows tilted just a hint and he drummed his fingers on his leg, something was bothering him. She reached over and touched his knee to get his attention. "You okay?" He hesitated. Daphne arched a brow at him. "No secrets between friends, remember?" Wesley nodded and then leaned in to whisper in her ear. "Didn't like that your sister was serving alcohol at her wedding. Thoughtless, considering she invited you." "Ah, that was sweet." She asked if I wanted her to shut down the drinks portion of the wedding, but she'd already had so many other things go wrong that I felt bad even asking. And the sweets were more tempting than the champagne. He nodded slowly. "I can make you a protein pancake when we get home. There's an eggnog flavor that just came out." She made a face at the suggestion. "Protein pancakes are horrible." "Not mine." "Yes, yours," she said, laughing. This felt good. It felt normal and right to be here with him, even if they were stuck in the back of a slowly moving car for the next few hours. Wesley had that hint of a smile to his somber face, and she wanted to coax it out even further. "When you leave," she teased, "I'm going to binge on real pancakes for a day. I'll gain 2 pounds and then go to the gym to work them right back off, but at least I'll get the craving out of my system." He glanced down at his big hands, clasped in his lap. Oh, shit. She'd said the wrong thing, hadn't she? "Sorry, Wes. I wasn't trying to throw it in your face. If it's something you have to do, I understand. I don't like it, but I'll understand." Wesley nodded slowly, still gazing at his hands. He looked thoughtful, but she knew him. He was wrestling with something. He inhaled slowly, closed his eyes, and then exhaled and looked over at her. "What?" she asked warily. "My plans changed." She tilted her head, confused. "Your plans changed?" He nodded. "I quit my job with the label." Daphne's eyes went wide. "You what? Why?" Did this mean she was losing him that much sooner? God, February was bad enough, but to think of him leaving right away was devastating. Was this why he was so fidgety? She felt like crying. "Wes, why? Why did you quit?" "So I can do this." And he leaned over, tilted her face toward him, and kissed her on the mouth. Daphne froze, shocked. She remained utterly still, even as he ended the light kiss and pulled back. "I don't understand," she breathed, even though her body was tingling with awareness just from that small kiss. "I'm not supposed to fall in love with my clients, Daphne, but I've been fighting how I feel for you for a long, long time. Ever since you came out of rehab and cussed me out the first time I made you do a burpee. You were so sad, but still fighting. I loved that spirit in you. You weren't ready to give up. And over time, it's been harder and harder for me to stop from touching you."
His hand moved to hers, and he took it in his grip, caressing her fingers. I'm supposed to be impartial and strong, so you have someone to lean on. And I'm failing. I did fail.
Bullshit! You're wonderful!
I'm the one that suggested to the label that I leave in February, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't trust myself to be neutral any longer. His fingers skimmed her knuckles in a touch that made her stomach flutter. And then, after we fought, I realized I was going about this all wrong. His dark-eyed gaze held hers. I don't think you need a life coach any longer, or someone to slap your hand when you reach for the wrong foods. You've shown me you can make great choices, but I'm hoping that, his thumb caressed her palm, that maybe you're ready to have a boyfriend, and that you haven't given up on me.
Given up on him? Daphne flung her arms around his neck and planted her mouth on his. He was everything she'd ever wanted. Their mouths met with a hard press, and she felt a shiver run through him. Excited, Daphne intensified the kiss, letting her emotions show as she took control of the caress, her mouth sliding over his, and then coaxing his lips open so she could flick her tongue against his. The moment their tongues touched, it was like lightning through her body. Heat curled through her, and suddenly she couldn't get close enough, their mouths devouring each other, and his hands roaming over her back. The car slid, careening on a patch of ice, and they broke apart. Wesley held on to Daphne as the car spun in a slow circle while the driver cussed and a Christmas carol blared over the radio. Dazed, Daphne stared out the windshield, watching the street slide past as they did a full 360-degree turn and then stopped. "Sorry," called the driver. "Just hit some ice. You guys okay?" "We're good," Daphne breathed. "I think..." Wesley nodded. The driver gave them a thumbs up, and then the car began to creep forward again. "Well," Wesley said after a moment, licking his lips, "I thought the world was spinning out of control with that kiss, but it might have been the roads." She giggled. "It can't be both?" The look he gave her was warm, so damn warm. "It can be." He brushed the backs of his fingers over her cheek. "You sure you want me, Daph? I'm not a prize by any stretch of the imagination. I'm a former drunk. I killed a man. I spent time in prison. And I'm not the most fun person in the world. I'm not good at relaxing. I'm a stickler for discipline." "Discipline can be fun in the right places," she teased, sliding a hand down the front of his jacket suggestively. To her surprise and pleasure, Wesley blushed. "I haven't dated anyone in a really, really long time." "Me either," she admitted. "Not really. And not anyone I've had strong feelings for." There'd been drug-fueled tour flings, but she couldn't even remember them. They were part of the shameful past she'd left behind. "We'll figure out dating again, together." He gazed down at her face, stroking her cheek. "I worry I'm not good enough for you." "Why? Because of your past? You're an ex-drunk. I'm an ex-druggie. The important part is that we keep it ex." "Because you're a global superstar and rich and famous. Because you're the funniest, smartest person I've ever met. Because you sparkle like no one else I've ever met, and I'm just the guy that shoves carrot sticks at you when you want a cupcake. I'm probably all wrong for you."
Daphne shook her head. You're the perfect man for me. You've supported me and been hard on me when I was weak. Everyone else lets me get what I want, and that's why I've failed so many times before. I never felt like anyone had my back in the past. They'd say they wanted me clean, and then they'd hand me drugs on the sly. She smiled up at him. You're the first person to ever call me on my bullshit, and I kind of love it. I love you, he said, all seriousness and intensity. It took her breath away. She crooked a finger at him. Then come and show me. He leaned in, and his lips brushed over hers once more. Her arms went around his neck, and their mouths locked, and then the world was no bigger than the back seat of a cab, creeping forward through icy streets. Their fingers interlocked, and Christmas music hummed through Daphne's ears. Songs of hope and joy, of love and peace, of family and sweethearts under mistletoe. Yeah, she was good with all that. This concludes Beauty and the Billionaire, The Wedding by Jessica Clare. Narrated by Gillian Macy. Copyright 2016 by Jessica Clare.